As dusk fell over the city, the maid dared to bring Prince Kyle his dinner. His Majesty had not left his chambers for a long time and had ordered himself not to be disturbed. The girl cautiously approached the ruler and placed food on the table in front of him. Kyle didn't seem to notice the presence of another person in the room. He was so engrossed in the novel he was reading. Suddenly, the book flew onto the table. The dishes on it clanged. The girl started to apologize in fright, but it wasn't her fault. Kyle explained that he was outraged by a novel he had spent a lot of time on, only to find that it was a terrible book. It was about the future of a country that was already plunged into discord. The prince of this kingdom, Damon Agnes, is trying to rescue him from the clutches of the Demon King, but he has to overcome all obstacles alone. In an incredible way, Kayla was deeply moved by this story. Even though it had nothing to do with his life, his reign was the complete opposite of the fate of the book's hero. Deciding not to frighten the maid any further, the prince let her go and fell into thought. Even now, sitting in his office, he could hear words of respect being shouted at him. Despite his age, Kyle has already managed to unite all lands under his leadership, except for the demonic ones. His people were sincerely delighted with their ruler. They even christened the prince the Emperor of the Black Star, but that didn't add to the boy's happiness. Kyle really enjoyed the process of fighting, and now there was nowhere to move. He had achieved everything. Preoccupied with depressive thoughts, the boy didn't notice that he had fallen asleep while sitting in his chair. He began to recover from a heavy sleep due to the feeling of someone quickly carrying him. Through half-open eyelids, Kyle saw the man running through the empty corridors. The prince felt no strength in his muscles at all. He could only trust his protector. Around the next bend, two masked strangers were already waiting for them. The man drew his sword. Without saying a word, the attackers attacked. The defender turned out to be a skilled warrior, although, of course, it was difficult for him with the prince on his back. In the end, the killers still cornered them. At the sounds of struggle, help rushed to them. They wanted to kill Prince Damon, which is what they shouted. Now the defender had no choice, and he nevertheless put the prince on the floor. He shouted that he would protect his emperor at all costs and gave his name as Fred. A fierce fight ensued, during which Kyle tried to understand what was happening and where he was. It was obvious that the prince was not at home. He did not know anyone around, but they wished him death. The only one who protected him from this was defender Fred, and he was in trouble. Kyle was tensely gathering the remaining strength within himself. He understood that time was running out. Suddenly, the boy heard one of the killers running towards him. Fred, who was pinned down on the other side of the corridor, shouted at the top of his lungs for his majesty to run away. The calls were in vain. The killer was already approaching the prince. There were only a few seconds left before the blow, but the plan was not destined to come true. The blade froze near Kyle's chest. The attacker could do nothing. He could not move. Kyle slowly opened his eyes. He thanked his conscience for allowing him to recover in time. The prince slowly rose to his feet and removed the sword from his chest. Seeing that the henchman was unable to resist, other assassins rushed to his aid. They did not know that they were running to certain death. The guy didn't even move, but everything around him exploded with blood. Only Fred remained in the corridor with him. Kyle was finally able to see himself. It turns out he had reincarnated into another person. The prince walked down the corridor, remembering fragments of the last book he had read. Somehow he became her hero, Damon Agnes, a prince without power in his own kingdom. Kyle looked at his new face with contempt. This sloppy look only infuriated him. According to the plot of the book, Damon was supposed to die from an attack by assassins, but Kyle's unexpected reincarnation helped the prince avoid death. If it weren't for his innate strength, he would have died along with his new body. The prince had already tried every method to make sure that this was really happening. Since he had read this book to the end, he knew that this world had only 3 years left. According to the plot, the Empire is destined to be absorbed by the Demon King, despite no resistance. But since Kyle was already in this world, his ego would not allow him to lose the kingdom. The boy decided to do everything possible to unite the kingdom before the demon attack. His innate strength was also not complete due to Damon's weak physical body, but such difficult circumstances, in a strange way, made the prince feel excitement and delight. Kyle developed a further course of action. The next day, he decided to deal with the attackers and those behind them. Today, he saw a bunch of guards standing in the hallways, but that wasn't the case yesterday. This made the guy come to the conclusion that this guard could not be trusted with his life. Lost in thought, he didn't notice that he had approached the palace exit until he was stopped. It turns out that he didn't have the right to go wherever he wanted on his own estate, because someone else had ordered security. This so outraged Kyle that he stopped talking and took action. One by one, he removed the guards who were hindering him from the world of the living. Ignoring the screams of the survivors, the boy headed for the front door. The first thing Kyle saw when he opened the door was a giant red moon. But the prince's peace was again disturbed by the guards, who learned that he had left the palace. This time they were not alone. They were accompanied by Julian, the head of security. Looking at his new kingdom, Kyle realized that he should suspect everyone except Fred. The prince said that he killed the guards for betraying a member of the imperial family. He was not going to argue. Such words made the guards tense up, especially after Damon told Agnes that the same fate would befall them all. Only Julian was outraged by the helpless boy's insolence. He decided that in that case, he needed to stop tossing and turning and finish what he started yesterday. When Kyle saw that another fight was brewing, he felt an incredible happiness. Julian was the first to attack. The prince was amused that because of his reincarnation, those around him did not consider him a strong opponent. He took the life of the head of security without even blinking an eye. There was silence at the exit from the palace. Everyone looked at Julian's corpse. Even Fred was incredibly surprised. He had never seen Damon like this in his life. Meanwhile, the prince announced that from now on the rules would change. For any violation and betrayal, he will execute everyone. This boy, who was weak yesterday, forced everyone present to kneel with his aura of power. Time passed, and gradually Kyle felt himself getting stronger, Damon's body getting stronger. And then one day, Fred informed him of the arrival of Mrs. Priscilla. Kyle knew a lot of unpleasant things about this heroine of the book. The girl was Damon's fiancée. A few minutes later, they were already sitting in the spacious hall. During the long silence, which Kyle had no intention of breaking, the girl managed to finish her tea. In the end, Priscilla could not stand it and announced that she had a great desire to break off the engagement. Thinking that Damon would have some objections to this, the princess wanted to make some arguments, but the boy decisively interrupted her with his consent. From surprise, she felt as if she had misunderstood him. He stood up from his chair, saying goodbye and having no desire to ever see each other again. Confused, Priscilla remained in the room, expecting a different outcome. Outside the door, Kyle encountered the princess's burly guards. They demanded an apology from Damon to the young lady for the way he had treated her. They knew what hurt Priscilla was that the prince had agreed to her decision so quickly. The girl really wanted Damon to suffer because of the breakup, and now the situation was like he didn't care about her at all. When the princess opened the door, she expected to see the prince pressed against the wall, but the way he easily dealt with her security impressed the girl. The more resistance her guards put up, the stronger the response they received. Terrified, Priscilla had never seen her ex-fiancé like this, and she, more than ever, wanted to solve this complex riddle, and to do so, she needed to stay. Therefore, the princess turned to Damon with one last request. The argument for staying was to resolve some issues before parting ways. Before answering, Kyle calculated the implications of his decisions. In the end, deciding that the girl could still be useful, he agreed. And so, 3 days have passed since their last meeting. Priscilla was very angry because her plans seemed to be unworkable. The guy didn't make contact, and she absolutely needed to know what kind of power he was carrying inside him right now. Realizing that there was little time for this, the princess decided to act today. It took about an hour to find Damon, but eventually the girl found him in the training room. She no longer had control over her emotions, and therefore immediately lashed out at him with reproaches. But the prince cut her off mid-sentence, demanding respect. After all, he owed her nothing. Finding nothing to say, Priscilla walked away. In fact, that's exactly what Kyle wanted. No one should have heard about his plans. He changed the palace guard and patrol route. The boy's intuition never deceived him, and it didn't let him down this time either. On the fourth night, the murderers crept into his palace again. Kyle was awake. He was expecting guests. They, in turn, were surprised that they had never met anyone on the road. It seemed that they were expected, although there was information that the security in the palace was now even stronger. Suddenly, one of the attackers fell to the floor, covered in blood. While the scumbags were wondering where the attack came from, they dealt with all but one of them using the same method. Kyle decided to reward the last of the murderers with the honor of seeing him. The last thing the assassin had time to think about was that no one knew the true power of Prince Damon. Everyone in this kingdom must finally understand that it is dangerous to associate with the prince. Suddenly, some explosions were heard from the other side of the palace. Kyle had completely forgotten that Priscilla was a magician. The girl had probably been attacked as well. His assumptions proved true. The enraged princess activated her mana to fight back. Although her appearance was also a surprise to the killers, they still attacked the young lady. Despite the protective shield that the girl managed to generate, the attacker's strength felt impressive. Eventually, from the powerful pressure, the shield began to collapse and the blade approached her chest. Seeing this, Priscilla was very scared, which caused the final destruction of the protective barrier. The killer took advantage of this weakness. He swung again, this time to kill. But unexpectedly, the attacker's hand stopped obeying him. His body seemed to be controlled by someone else. With all his strength, the murderer stabbed himself in the chest with his sword. As he was dying, he saw Prince Damon in the room. It was his handiwork. Seeing the death of his accomplice, the last of the killers decided to flee. Kyle, in principle, was not going to chase him. The stranger was needed alive in order to track who he would run to report to. That's when the big game will begin. The customer will answer all of this. As the days passed, Kyle felt increasing tension in his body due to his increasing strength. The guy spent almost the entire time thinking about how to strengthen his shell. Sometime after Sunday, Damon's sister, Evelyn Agnes, announced her desire to meet her brother. According to the book, she and her brother were not enemies. On the contrary, the girl supported him. But it seems that reality and the book no longer coincided. Evelyn was also the heir to the throne. She was also well aware that the boy had been attacked. The princess perceived her brother's restrained behavior as the consequences of the horror he must have experienced. Evelyn promised to help with the palace security, but Damon politely declined. Finally, the princess got to the heart of her visit. She was interested in the succession ceremony and her brother's decision regarding it. The girl's wish was for Damon to refuse, which she directly stated, and her brother's questions about the arguments in favor of her words angered Evelyn. The girl was sure that the boy would not be able to cope with the trials of the succession ceremony, and even if the guy managed to do it, she believed that he wouldn't last even a week on the throne. By giving such arguments, Evelyn used Agnes's family power, suggestion, against her brother. But the girl didn't know that Damon was no longer a defenseless boy, and her magic tricks didn't work. In the end, Evelyn Agnes had to return home with nothing. She informed the head of her security that her brother had refused her help. The girl also noticed strong changes in Damon's personality, as if he had always hidden his power. The prince's unfamiliar energy worried him, so Evelyn ordered his security to be increased. The girl came to the conclusion that she needed to protect her brother, even against his will. A few hours after she returned home, Kayla was brought a gift from her. The princess gave him an elixir of endurance and strength of a 1,000-year-old ogre. The guy, frankly, was surprised by such kindness towards him. He noticed that his strength and Evelyn's strength were similar to each other, but he thought it was impossible. So it was to his advantage that Damon's sister supported her brother. Kyle decided that it was time to find the traitor inside the palace and called Priscilla. The girl was surprised by such a change in her ex-fiancé's behavior, but Kyle's desire was justified by practical necessity. Before she arrived, the boy had managed to draw a diagram of the spell that she was supposed to activate. Priscilla was amazed by the prince's new talent. She had never seen such magic before. She promised to handle it by tomorrow, but wondered why the prince needed the magic of exposure. Kyle didn't want to go into details. The kingdom wasn't ready for such truth yet. The next day, everyone who was in the palace lined up in one of the courtyards. Everyone was curious as to why His Highness had gathered them. Recently, the prince began to frighten the servants with his behavior. After waiting for everyone to gather, Kyle gave the order to Priscilla to begin. The girl activated a magic spell. The pentagram on the floor lit up with a bright glow. People began to whisper anxiously among themselves. Priscilla bit her finger at the end. 4 drops of the princess's blood fell into the center of the magic circle, solidifying the spell. This struck the palace manager like a bolt from the blue. Unable to contain himself any longer, he began his transformation right in front of everyone present. Priscilla was horrified by what appeared before her. The enemy's true nature was revealed by the magic of exposure. The manager turned out to be a real monster, an agent of the Demon King. And just like in the book, this demon completely lost control from the smell of the princess's blood. The girl didn't understand why the monster chose her. The princess's guards rushed to her aid. Only Kyle knew that her blood was like a drug for monsters. According to the book, the demons even managed to capture her in order to constantly feed on her. Despite the bravery of the guards, the prince knew that their efforts were futile. They were ordinary people. The only one who could resist the demon now was Kyle, and he stepped forward. The monster rushed towards the object of its desire. It was not afraid of anything. But that was her mistake, because Kyle grabbed her neck tightly with his hand. The demon wriggled out and forcefully threw the prince away from him a great distance. Only now, after such an unpleasant surprise, did the monster notice that this was not the prince's magic. The power the boy now wielded made the monster wonder who was really in front of him. Kyle, without moving from his spot, firmly and clearly stated that he was an enemy of demons. After these words, the monster jumped forward, trying to tear the prince apart. But the boy was just counting on it. He needed the demon to come as close as possible. With one sharp movement, the prince struck his opponent in the heart area. Kyle took the demon's life, depriving it of the ability to transmit information to its master. A few seconds later, Princess Evelyn's guards converged on the courtyard. The knights were concerned about Damon's condition. He replied that he felt fine and there was no reason to worry at all. The guy was sure that it was too early to reveal the secret of the existence of demons to the general public. Shortly after the incident, the latest news reached the palace of the third prince, Alex Agnes. At first, His Highness thought it was about their planned attack on his brother, but the servant reported the appearance of demons in Damon Agnes's palace. Everything was known in general terms because there was no connection with spies in the prince's circle. This was as disturbing as the changes in Prince Damon's behavior. He had definitely become stronger. But Alex didn't believe his brother at all. He would rather have thought he was crazy. The third prince had a very developed ego. The information that Damon did not refuse the succession ceremony hurt Alex. He ordered to spy on his brother and give him a warm welcome at the trials. While his brother was plotting against Damon Agnes, Kyle, who was in his body, was looking for allies. In order to get to this place, the guy had to trick the guards of his palace. Although from the outside, Moonlight Evening was just a restaurant, the prince was interested in what was hidden behind it. He sat down at the table and gave the secret password to the waiter who approached him. A few minutes later, they were already descending the dark stairs to the Moon Eye Information Guild. The stern girl who met him downstairs asked incredulously who he was. The prince insisted that he had business with the guild branch. He was not going to answer questions, but the receptionist refused to let him go any further until he gave his name. She explained this by saying that they had recently opened and no one knew about this branch yet. It was at that moment that Kyle realized he had rushed into making connections. The branch guards rushed to the prince to eliminate the potential spy. But Kyle wasn't going to die in this dungeon. With one movement, he scattered the attackers in different directions around him. Seasoned warriors, hardened in battle, died instantly at the hands of a hooded stranger. The girl at the reception desk froze in place. Kyle approached her and said that his identity was unimportant. A few seconds later, Eileen, the receptionist, had already taken the stranger's order. The guy was interested in information about the Black Forest and the preparation of fake documents, but Eileen didn't do it out of fear. During the fight, the girl saw the gray hair of one of the members of the royal family. This unexpected visit interested her so much that an order was given to find out everything about the boy. Eileen was bribed by the unknown power of a stranger. She was convinced that today she could see the future emperor before her. While Kyle was doing his thing, Priscilla couldn't find a place for herself. The girl desperately wanted an explanation for what had happened before her eyes. Someone had to answer for the fear Damon had put her through, but Priscilla's wishes were not important in this palace. The prince refused to accept her. And if the girl didn't insist, Fred remained adamant. The princess perceived any arguments as lies because she had seen the prince's strength with her own eyes. Fred, in turn, insisted on maintaining complete secrecy about what had happened. Finally, Damon's bodyguard announced that the girl should return to her home immediately. Kyle couldn't accept the girl not because he didn't want to. In fact, he had already set off on his journey. From the very beginning, the prince knew that several people were watching him. These spies were even with him in the train car. But Kyle's plans were not to get rid of the tail because these people could become useful in the future. The prince guessed that the spies were sent by the Moon Eye Guild. According to the book, these people could have been a good support in the future struggle. He understood that his bodyguard alone would lack the experience and strength for this. In general, the prince went to the city of Ruin with the same purpose, to search for strong allies. Only the local lord and his family knew about the Black Forest around the city. Kyle was rushing here specifically for the Purification Festival. He wanted to change the fate of the ruins, because according to the book, the Black Forest will destroy the human population during the festival. From the novel, Kyle knew that entering the Black Forest required permission from the city's ruler. That's why he summoned one of the guild's spies, which shocked the guild. The girl had to find out about a place where she could recruit into a mercenary unit. The spy had a lot of questions about the prince's extensive knowledge, but he left her alone with her assumptions, not intending to make life easier for the guy. While the city of Ruin was preparing for another festival, Bella informed her father of her intentions. The daughter of the city governor wanted to eradicate the Order of the Purifiers, who were preventing the containment of evil. Duke Joshua did not understand how his daughter could do what even their ancestors had failed to do. But Bella was adamant. She wanted no more sacrifices at the Purification Festival, especially for the sake of feeding the dark essence in the Black Forest. The girl had long ago decided everything for herself regarding this matter. She was not looking for approval. The only thing that worried Bella now was where to find mercenaries who would have enough strength for such a mission. The girl felt that devotion to tradition forced the townspeople to be controlled by the cleaners. With such gloomy thoughts, Bella reached the arena where the selection would be held. Her old friends were already present at the venue along with some of the candidates. They understood well that the girl's position did not coincide with her father's opinion, but the main thing was to find someone useful for the squad. The guys shared their opinion, however. that there was no one worthy among the candidates present. Some suggested that instead of this pointless task, they simply do everything themselves. But Hart, one of Bella's close friends, told her he had several candidates in mind. And as soon as he said those words, Kyle entered the arena. A few minutes after the governor's daughter appeared, the selection began. The prince looked at Bella with great interest. According to the book, the girl was extremely gifted. In the future, she's to become one of the most powerful warriors in the empire. With these thoughts in mind, Kyle's turn came, and the prince decided to introduce himself by his real name. He dyed his hair before the test, so he was sure no one would recognize Damon. One of the murderers, who was still wanted and feared to be apprehended, entered the arena against him for a duel. Kyle thought he shouldn't show his true strength from the start. But the enemy perceived this as weakness. After another series of threats, the robber rushed into the attack, but the boy didn't even move. He carefully watched his opponent's movements, calculating how he could disrupt the trajectory of his blow. At the last moment, the prince made one sharp movement with his foot, and the attacker flew to the ground. But Kyle didn't have a plan to just take a leap. He punched the robber in the face before he could land. This made the opponent fly into the air like a balloon. The victory undoubtedly remained for the prince. The murderer was unconscious. This greatly shocked those present because everyone knew the strength and temper of the criminal. Hart didn't think the boy had any exceptional power, but he was interested in Bella's opinion on the matter because this candidate seemed promising. Kenneth, another comrade, was not at all impressed by this duel, especially Kyle. Terry, Bella's third childhood friend, also believed that this candidate would only flirt with death. In the end, these two did convince Bella that they wouldn't be able to find worthy mercenaries. Suddenly, the governor's daughter looked up and saw a strange man entering the arena. She kept her eyes on him and eventually saw the tattoo of the Order of the Purifiers on his leg. This became an unexpected incentive for decisive action. The followers of this secret cult have not allowed the people of Ruin to live in peace for many decades. And so, despite all the warnings, one of its representatives was selected. As expected, the man was poisoned by evil and had already begun his transformation. Those present had little time. Something powerful was trying to escape from his body. But Bella solved this problem with one jump and a skillful kick. The girl once again proved that she is respected for a reason, as the heiress of a respectable family. One of Bella's ancestors had already been able to tame the evil that the girl now wanted to destroy once and for all. But as it turned out, the saboteur was not alone. Another infected one appeared on the other side of the arena. The girl realized that the first man was simply distracting her from the others. But there was not enough time to react. She was too far away. And the next second, a powerful explosion sounded. Bella couldn't even realize what had happened when the smoke cleared. The enemy was nowhere to be seen. Kenneth, Terry, and Hart looked at the girl in amazement, not understanding how she managed to do this. It turned out that no one saw the real hero except Bella. But she wasn't going to share this information with anyone because she was starting to suspect everyone. Bella noticed that Kyle appeared behind the mutant at the right moment. The guy, with the help of his unknown power, was able to make the saboteur's explosion safe for others. Kyle was once again convinced that he had his good memory to thank, which never failed him. He knew about the cultist attack from the book. It gave him the opportunity to prove himself. In the end, the boy achieved what he wanted. He was selected for a mercenary unit. Half an hour later, at a squad meeting, everyone present finally looked at each other. After giving the audience time to get to know each other, Bella began to outline her plan. She told me about the evil Black Forest and how the entrance to it was guarded by the city guard. She told me about her ancestor who was able to build this city after conquering evil. Bella also revealed something that no one knew. Evil was not destroyed, but only sealed. Ruin has been paying tribute to him with human lives at the Purification Festival for many years. With the help of a ritual, convicts who have committed serious crimes go to the Dark Forest. Despite the fact that bad people suffer, this happens 5 times a month. That's why the girl thought ahead. Soon the criminals would run out and the residents would have to pay. Although these sacrifices forced the seal to contain evil, Bella did not like the methods. The Duchess was certain that the time had come to put an end to the terrible tradition of the City of Ruins. Since evil had weakened and those present at the table were the strongest warriors in the city, they had a chance. These words made the squad members wonder why Kyle was with them. The prince understood that there were people nearby who would become the hope of their generation in the future. Of course, they had a prejudiced attitude towards him, but Bella wasn't going to reveal the truth about Kyle. She was simply relying on her hunch. The guy realized that most likely the girl was guided by suspicion of others. Her trust was undermined by the invasion of the arena. The arena was located in the palace of the city governor and was well guarded. Kyle knew the names of the traitors, but he was in no position to reveal them now. Bella realized that the conversation had reached a dead end. That's why she decided to change the subject to discuss the details of the upcoming operation plan. When the meeting was over, Kyle decided to practice his strength. He saw himself gradually becoming more powerful, but he still had problems. In order to confront a strong opponent, the guy needed to speed up. Suddenly, the prince's thoughts were interrupted by a female voice. There was a girl standing behind him. She wasn't going to attack, she was just complimenting him. Despite her innocent face, the prince knew very well who was in front of him. The absolute evil of the Black Forest came to visit him in person. Realizing that the game was useless, the girl immediately got to the point. She persistently asked the guy not to go on the expedition. The requests eventually turned into death threats. After that, just as it had appeared, the specter of evil suddenly disappeared. Kyle wasn't intimidated by the last 10 minutes. He was inclined to deal with current problems. Just like the first time, he found his spy without any problems. The girl gave him another order, a stone for storing spells. Although it was a problem that was difficult to solve in a short time, she managed it with 5 points. The girl did not give up hope that answers about the reasons for the client's actions would still be forthcoming. But Kyle was adamant. He had no intention of sharing the information with the guild. Before dawn, a detachment of mercenaries set out for the Black Forest. Only then did the prince realize that the name literally described everything around him. It was also strange that apart from the local authorities, no one in the empire knew about this place and its danger. The prince noticed that Bella's authority was unquestionable. Everyone followed her regardless of anything. After walking a few more meters, the squad members felt an increase in dark energy. But Bella didn't want to stop, quite the opposite. The girl was about to announce her arrival. She released a powerful stream of energy with her spear deep into the forest, which seemed to cut the earth in half. Assessing the result of her efforts, Bella, without saying anything, simply ran forward. The squad members were even a little confused by such an unexpected attack. But having come to their senses in time, they hurried after her. The advance turned out to be short-lived, as the mercenaries' loud appearance quickly led to the first monsters being found. The wolves rushed at the girl without hesitation. Kenneth came to the leader's aid in time. The guy deftly turned the jaw of the first of them. As it turned out, this boy had quite a bit of power in his hands. Hart also did not stand still. He skillfully dealt with the other 2 monsters. But as it turned out, that was just the beginning. A whole flock of monsters came out of the forest thickets to have dinner. One of the mercenaries, who had been acting quieter than the others, suddenly ordered everyone to retreat. Candy, that was her name, created an energy tornado around her that was rapidly growing. The wolves did not have time to escape and were instantly burned in a blue flame. During this short fight, the prince did nothing. He just watched the team's actions. But, with the advent of giant bats, Kyle decided to join the coordinated effort. With one wave of his hand, the boy stopped the bat flock. Such capabilities of the stranger greatly impressed Candy, who until now had distrusted him. But there was no time to sort out the relationship. Following the bats through the thickets, a giant bear was already making its way into the forest, and he wasn't going to wait. In addition to the monster, unexpectedly, roots began to grow rapidly from under the ground. It divided the mercenaries into 2 groups. So far, Kenneth and Bella have been quite successful in dealing with the monster without involving others in the fight. But during this time, Hart and Kyle found themselves completely cut off from the rest of the squad. When his companions finally disappeared behind the wall of roots, Kyle felt a distance forming between them. The prince knew for sure that this was for the best, because he found himself a traitor one-on-one. Looking at how nervous Hart was, the guy finally decided to end it with him. Kyle openly stated that he knew about the traitor's plan, which made him stop in his tracks. As the prince liked, the situation began to escalate. The rest of the mercenaries, meanwhile, began to worry deeply about Hart. They thought the boy was incapable of providing proper help in case of danger. They considered Kyle weak, but Bella didn't share the concerns. She only wanted to move forward. Probably of all those present, the Duchess believed most in the prince's strength. Despite recent events, Bella was unable to suspect her closest friends of betrayal. She had known some of them since they were very young. For her, they were family. Therefore, Bella was pleased that her friend ended up with such a powerful warrior. Hart held many titles, but he was also one of the leaders of the Purifier's cult. The prince was well acquainted with his biography, as it was described in detail in the novel. As soon as he found out that only Kyle knew his secret, the traitor began to behave very impudently. He was confident that he would deal with the enemy and quickly return to fulfill his goal. Drawing his weapon, Hart rushed into the attack, unaware that he was making a big mistake. The guy's biggest flaw was his exaggerated self-confidence. But Kyle, without even moving, somehow managed to counterattack his opponent. This came as a shock to Hart, considering he was left without a wireless hand. The prince decided that from now on he could not hide his abilities at all. He didn't care what his opponent found out before his death. Hart hoped to the last that his family's technology would help him survive, but Kyle effortlessly repelled all of the guy's attempts to take revenge. A moment later, he found himself dangerously close to the enemy. Realizing that his time was up, the traitor said that the mission of the cleaners would still be accomplished. But this was not news to the prince. He knew well that Hart did not act alone. The guy clearly calculated his time. To successfully complete the task, the prince still needed to find the seal that would restrain evil. The mercenary squad was almost in the center of the forest, so they had to hurry. But getting the seal back was not an easy task. The remnants of the evil spirit that remained within him began to resist the thief. Having forced the monster to appear fully before him, Kyle without hesitation destroyed it with a single blow. The guy hoped that this item would help him successfully carry out his intentions. While the boy was dealing with the seal, the rest of the group made their way through the forest thickets. Although they obeyed Belle in everything, the mercenaries were still unhappy with her decision to abandon their brother. But the girl was relentless. She hurried, feeling that time was not on their side. Suddenly, an elf mage named Caroline ordered everyone to stop. The warning was appropriate, for in a moment the evil they had come to visit appeared before them. The sinister witch scared even Bella. It was terrifying that such a powerful horror was hidden under the guise of a fragile, beautiful girl. It seemed that the witch had no intention of attacking, but was simply circling the clearing. But the Duchess understood that this was a deceptive feeling. They needed to be prepared for confrontation. Bella hoped that years of containment still suppressed much of the power of evil. But Kenneth's sudden death forced the girl to reconsider her beliefs. It turns out that only Terry, Candy, and herself were left alive in the clearing. Her friend was a traitor. When the boy took off his shirt, a tattoo of the cult of the Purifiers became visible on his chest. It turns out that Bella's appearance here was part of a plan, as revenge for the evil for her long imprisonment. Terry, in all seriousness, considering himself the son of a witch, hoped for her mercy. But his expectations were in vain. This creature could only be angry. With one sharp movement, she cut off the boy's head. Kyle approached the clearing, hurrying as fast as he could, but unexpectedly he met a terrified Caroline. The elf begged to escape with her, telling them that they had been betrayed. But the prince had his own plans. He knew the history of this witch and the path of violence she had gone through. Megan simply loved torturing and killing her enemies, even if it meant she herself suffered. Bella's appearance aroused curiosity in the witch, especially considering that the girl was energetically immature. The Duchess had nothing to oppose evil, so the city her ancestor had built would be next on the list. Anticipating a quick meal, the witch prepared for murder. But unexpectedly, her plans were thwarted. Somehow, Bella discovered extraordinary abilities through her rage. She attacked the source of evil with all the power she was capable of. But this was not enough. The Duchess's attack only caused the witch to smile. Megan loved the suffering on the faces of her victims, especially when they realized that their efforts were in vain. That's why she decided to show her opponent her power. Through her wound, the witch released a pack of bloodthirsty wolves into the world. Bella understood that she had very little time to resist. So the girl decided to act. She disabled one wolf after another, avoiding their claws. But due to the intensity of the attacks, her weapon could not withstand it and broke. The monsters rushed at the Duchess with increased enthusiasm. Bella realized that she had one chance left to kill her opponent, so she flew into the sky. The girl hoped for the success of the attack because the witch did not have full strength. The Duchess turned the lawn into a lightning bolt. Megan was somewhere down there. Having exhausted her last strength, a minute later Bella also found herself on the ground. The girl was in very bad condition. She was spitting blood. But as it turned out, the attempt to end evil was a failure from the very beginning. The witch remained unharmed. It turns out that she was free for many years. Everything that the mercenary squad was guided by was a lie. This information completely devastated the Duchess, and the girl completely surrendered morally. Bella didn't even think about running away when more monsters began to approach her to end her life. Unable to bear the strain any longer, the Duchess lost consciousness. At that moment, Kyle finally came out onto the lawn. The prince's arrival seems to have been the event Megan was most looking forward to. She began to approach the hero, telling her life story and trying to instill fear. But Kyle was perfectly informed about her personality. Before him was the absolute Queen of Death, the most powerful witch in this empire. Despite all this, the prince did not understand why he should obey her orders and instructions. The boy was not going to run away in terror from the Black Forest. Moreover, he was not going to die because he was confident in his abilities. Kyle had plans for the witch. He wanted to make her his slave. This idea came to the prince's mind quite a long time ago. Given her capabilities, Kyle considered this decision absolutely correct. Perhaps the same fate will befall Bella, but only after the final awakening of her power. When the prince voiced his plans to his opponent, it only caused her to laugh. The witch attacked the boy with all the power she was capable of, but Kyle had an ace up his sleeve. He threw a spell storage stone he had received from the spy in her direction. This stone contained a surprise, a spell from Bella's ancestor, already well known to the witch. This spell was supposed to transport the souls of Megan and the prince to another world for confrontation. That's why the boy was looking for the seal of evil in the forest earlier. The witch's attack stopped, but she noted that she knew perfectly well about the boy's plans. Moreover, she had willingly allowed them to do whatever they pleased in the Black Forest. She, like everyone before her, believed that the boy's soul was weaker than hers, and therefore he would not see success. Over the years of freedom, the witch has gained almost infinite power, regularly strengthening it with new murders. Kyle wasn't 100% sure if he was stronger, but he wanted to take a chance. Only in that place will my prince find out if Damon Agnes really had the soul of a king who ruled the world. This information was brought up periodically in the novel, but was not clarified because the prince was killed at the beginning. Megan openly laughed at her opponent's plans. She didn't see him as a worthy opponent, but just another insect to crush. The witch generated a giant dragon and sent it towards Kyle. The guy, as usual, didn't move. Megan took this as humility and acceptance of her own defeat. But in her premature joy, she didn't notice that her hand suddenly disappeared along with the dragon. The prince was left standing in his place, unharmed. In this world, he felt both his own power more clearly, as well as the power of the soul of the avatar he was in. The feeling of power increased in proportion to the unexpected despair in Megan's eyes. The witch has finally lost control of herself. In all the centuries she has lived on Earth, no human has been able to stand up to her like this. An opponent appeared who was truly stronger than her and was causing the witch significant damage. Kyle would have taken Megan's life without hesitation, but the boy needed the witch to finally break. Because over the years, the idea that she was invincible had finally become deeply rooted in her mind. And judging by her reaction now, she didn't even suspect that she might be injured in some way. Gradually, parts of Megan's body dissolved into thin air one by one. Finally, the powerful witch realized that the boy in front of her was not a passable opponent at all. At one point, Megan even thought that she might actually die right now. This prompted her to beg Kyle to stop the torture. It turns out that the witch loved her life more than anything. But the prince was unstoppable. He wanted to gain a piece of her power by killing such a powerful opponent. Thanks to the spell he used against her, this was possible. In this world without a physical shell, Megan could die an infinite number of times. Through incomprehensible torture, the boy aimed to completely subjugate her to his will. Oddly enough, it didn't take the prince much time to carry out his intentions. An exhausted Megan lay on the ground in front of him begging for mercy, and Bella hadn't even woken up yet. He not only gained an ally for himself, but he was also able to prevent an alliance of evil that could have formed. With the awakening of the powerful Witch of Death, the world did not expect anything good, to put it mildly. But even though Megan lost this battle, deep down she harbored a desire for revenge. She solemnly promised her new master revenge. But the monster in angelic form still didn't know the boy well. He was completely uninfluenced. Kyle knew his stuff well. The only thing the guy could promise Megan was a lot of potential victims. He knew that to save this empire, many enemies would need to be eradicated. After being rescued from the Black Forest, Bella tried to slowly pull herself together. Her father was very worried about her. It took 3 days to find the mercenary squad she led, but no one could be found except the girl. To be honest, Duke Joshua had no idea how to communicate with his daughter and answer her questions. He understood that Bella was berating herself for losing her friends and subordinates, although I thought it wasn't her fault. The Duchess felt that at least in memory of the fallen, she should become stronger. Gradually, through suffering, Bella became who she was destined to be. Of course, the girl had no doubt that the witch had survived and escaped, so Bella made a wish to meet her enemy again and avenge those she had taken. In the recesses of her memory was the image of Kyle. She seemed to see him before losing consciousness. For some reason, it seemed to the Duchess that his chances of survival were not so small. The Moon Eye Guild also finally received the latest news, and the report was, to put it mildly, impressive. Eileen was surprised by the news that the Black Forest had disappeared. All evil had simply left these places. This led to the idea that the witch had been eliminated, but at the same time there was no confirmation of this conclusion. The girl was inclined to believe that this was, after all, the work of the object of their observation, and although she wasn't sure of his identity, judging by recent events, he was incredibly strong. It could have happened that a direct descendant of the imperial family had recently visited them. Every hero knew that no one in the Empire could compete with these real monsters. Eileen requested all the information known to the guild to date about the object of observation. From the report, she learned that this person could only be the captive Prince Damon Agnes. It wasn't just the guild that was interested in the prince during his absence. Fred barely managed to fend off the attacks of the captain of the Imperial Mages Squad, Adam. This time, the official was not satisfied with the guard's formal answers. He refused to leave without meeting the prince in person to sign important papers. Such activity on the part of the imperial family worried Fred. The bad feeling was also heightened by the fact that Damon himself had been absent for almost a week. The succession ceremony was coming up and these papers had to be signed. Since the captain was fed promises every day, he suspected that the prince had broken the rules. He wanted to do anything to please and prove that the prince was not in his possessions. By reasoning, Adam was the man of the third prince, Alex Agnes, and his lord would have liked it. But Fred remained adamant and would not allow the guest into his master's chambers. But he underestimated the captain's impudence, who, pushing everyone around him away, ran up the stairs. In anticipation of his victory, Adam opened the door to Damon's chambers without knocking and burst inside. But reality turned out to be cruel for the official. The prince was in the palace and was busy with his own affairs. Kyle glared at the captain and put down his book. The way he did it made Adam immediately start apologizing for his actions. The captain immediately sensed a change in the captive prince's behavior, as if he were a completely different person. With incredible authority and self-respect, Kyle took the papers for signature. When the uninvited guest left, Fred was finally able to give vent to his feelings. The guard was very worried about his prince and demanded details. Recent events almost deprived Kyle of the opportunity to compete for the throne, but by some miracle he managed to do it. Now the boy's immediate concern was to strengthen his avatar's body. Fred did his best to follow Kyle's instructions regarding the ogre heart that Princess Evelyn had given him. Absorbing this artifact was supposed to help the body better cope with the force that was tearing it apart. The next day, a gathering of mercenaries took place in one of the capital's taverns. They discussed the issues of fulfilling the third prince's order. Prince Damon's palace, according to the stories of their predecessors, was guarded by someone very powerful. But Prince Alex is not going to give up on his plans no matter what. For the mercenaries, the last chance to get money was the night before the succession ceremony. While discussing the details, the men did not immediately notice that they were not alone in the room. Megan slowly emerged from the shadows, smilingly threatening those present with death. This, of course, angered the mercenaries, and they rushed at the witch with weapons and the intention of finishing her off. Several murderers immediately became victims. They didn't even have time to understand anything, but a few managed to run to the witch and cut off her head. They thought that was the end of the story with the stranger. But Megan had a different opinion, and a moment later she appeared in her restored form. The mercenaries realized that they were facing a real monster and were frozen with horror. The Death Witch has taken her first victims. In that context, having a landlord wasn't so bad. The night passed peacefully for Prince Damon. A large number of indirect descendants gathered for the succession ceremony. Everyone had the desire to fight for the throne, even Anthony Elonis, who had never had one before. Or Lynette Elonis, whose appearance in this palace his brother also did not expect. Everyone knew perfectly well that Damon Agnes would compete with them and wanted to take revenge on him. A rare moment to mock a direct descendant, even though he was considered trash and a disgrace to the emperor's family. Even minor relatives were rumored to have more charisma and ambition than the captive prince. The ceremony had almost begun, but Damon was still not there, which was causing all sorts of gossip. Suddenly the door opened and all conversation fell silent. A young man entered the selection hall who did not at all live up to the lofty rumors about him. Kyle cast a watchful eye over everyone present and said that the ceremony could now begin, although the prince was preparing for the trials by increasing his strength. In fact, he didn't know exactly what would happen at this ceremony. It wasn't described in the novel because Damon was killed at the beginning of the book, so you have to be careful. Kyle knew well the attitude of others towards his avatar and understood that he could not change it in one day. The organizers of the ceremony announced the rules of the tests and wished all participants success. On the way to the observation room, one of them couldn't help but make comparisons. The steward found such a radical change from a Tuktia to a true royal personage strange. Prince Damon now seemed like a worthy representative of the imperial family, mature and proud. However, despite such striking changes, these trials are his death. The third prince tried his best to make his brother a prisoner of this trap forever. The participants rushed ahead of each other to the door that opened the first test. Lynette also succumbed to the general panic, but at the last moment she paused to look at Damon. He stood motionless and seemed to be in no hurry at all. The girl was brought out of her thoughts by her brother, reminding her that they needed to go. When the last of the participants left the hall, Kyle turned to the door. He knew that his every step would be closely watched, which meant that there would be danger everywhere. The first thing the prince heard when he entered the testing room was a noise like splashing water. It turned out that man-eating bugs had been released against Kyle, but that didn't scare him at all. He managed to increase his strength level and strengthen his body, counting on such obstacles. Quickly overcoming the first test, the prince smiled. He didn't know what awaited him next, but he could imagine the shocked faces of the guards. The next test was a giant maze, on the threshold of which a surprise also awaited the boy. The Death Knight, a magical undead, rushed towards him, preventing him from finding his way. Using one of his cunning skills, the guy easily identified his opponent's weak spot. Kyle had already begun generating energy to destroy the knight. But he, having guessed what the guy's next step would be, instantly multiplied. This only caused a smile. The prince's enemies were not yet distinguished by their mental abilities. Kyle was finally convinced of what he had suspected before. They were not going to let him out of here alive. Moreover, perhaps this also applied to other participants. Since a runny nose was a violation of the rules, the prince decided that from now on he too could not follow them. The Death Knights raised their swords and all together ran to attack the enemy. Kyle stood bravely and firmly on his feet, fending off all their attacks. Meanwhile, further down the maze, Lynette mused about how incredibly difficult these tests were. Only her disguise skills helped her pass the first test. Now the girl was running from the Death Knights. A succession ceremony had never been like this. She hadn't taken part in the tests yet, but she suspected that there was no radio. The opponents were very strong from the very beginning. Turning another corner, the girl encountered Prince Damon, who was also fighting off the attackers. The sight before her made Lynette forget her own enemies. This direct descendant of the imperial family had considerable power. You could say that the undead themselves were easy prey for him, not the other way around. Watching the unparalleled fight, Lynette became convinced that the prince was hiding his powers. Despite the fact that he fooled his entire family, Damon endured their bullying for many years. Meanwhile, Kyle decided to create an energy storm to dispel the Death Knight reinforcements. As soon as he had completed his task, the guy eliminated the first of the enemies. Soon others began to join him. The tactics of the undead were monotonous. The moment he killed someone, another immediately attacked. It was easy to calculate. The main thing was to keep up with their speed. After dealing with the second challenge, Kyle felt sorry for the other participants. They got into a lot of trouble just because of his participation in the succession ceremony. The prince was right. The overseers were gradually losing control of their emotions. Considering him a weak target, they did not expect such an outcome. Damon's strength was impressive. Despite such troubles, Prince Alex's task had to be completed. But the person the chief overseer had called to him was no longer available. Instead, Prince Damon stood in the doorway of the room himself, wiping the blood from his hand. While Kyle was dealing with the succession to the throne, Prince Alex was informed of the death of his killers. More precisely, not even about death, but about disappearance instead of bodies. Only traces of blood magic were found. Alex's main henchman, the magician Jeremy, volunteered to find out more details about this case. The prince didn't like the tight knot that was being formed around the Damon case. Such a worthless competitor was completely unacceptable to His Highness. The last chance to get rid of the splinter was to blow it out during the ceremony, which Alex emphasized. He did not know that at that very moment the executors of his order were themselves on the verge of death. The chief warden urged his subordinates to rush into an attack on Prince Damon. In fact, he was satisfied with this plot twist. The candidate's death would happen without any unnecessary eyes. But Kyle, in turn, saw this as a good chance to punish the traitors with death for their machinations. Despite fierce resistance, he effortlessly dodged any attacks. The overseers departed one by one to another world, unable to resist such a powerful force. At some point, Kyle got tired of defending and fending off attacks and decided to go on the offensive. His opponent, out of fear, immediately activated a fiery protective shield. The boy hoped that this would protect him from the attacker. But the prince destroyed his hopes with one move. The flames did not harm him at all. In the end, the head warden finally realized that the plan to destroy Damon had failed. And it was a failure from the very beginning because no one knew that the prince was pretending to be weak. Kyle approached the man, showing with all his appearance that he was the greatest predator in this empire. The frightened warden, unable to bear the tension, immediately promised to confess everything. He was ready to betray even his own customers. But the prince didn't need it. He already knew their names. And when Kyle was the only one left standing in the room, he turned to one of the guards. The boy felt that during his murder, some essence still remained inside the boy. The demon, who immediately responded to the challenge, as did the overseers, was surprised by the power of the Agnes descendant. But what surprised him most was that his appearance did not come as a surprise to the prince. This prompted the monster to analyze the opponent. But Kyle wasn't in the mood to talk. He wanted to end the evil. A terrified Lynette ran through the corridors of the labyrinth, searching for the lost Damon Agnes. The girl realized that the powerful prince was her last chance for survival. Out of fear around the next corner, she almost killed Anthony Alonis, but the boy managed to dodge skillfully. Both relatives were surprised that the other was still alive. Anthony was very surprised by his sister's goal of finding Prince Damon. He didn't understand why she would look for a weakling, but the girl explained that His Highness is a very powerful warrior. This greatly offended the proud brother. The angry demon, although he was a giant, was still weaker than Megan. Kyle wasn't going to mess with him for long, especially in the context of the fact that unwanted witnesses may come running to the noise. Lost in his thoughts, the prince suddenly realized that his opponent had approached him almost face to face. The fight turned out to be short-lived and fatal for the evil spirit. Kyle pierced the monster's chest with a lightning-fast movement, extracting the core of evil. Even as he died, the monster cursed Prince Damon's family. Busy fighting the demon, Kyle didn't immediately notice that he wasn't alone in the room. Lynette and Anthony Alonesi stood in the doorway of the observation room. After what he saw, Anthony finally believed in the almost supernatural power of the prince, whom everyone despised. He simply destroyed such a powerful monster that no human could resist. Despite the comments from the newcomers, Kyle declared Lynette the second winner after himself. Anthony came in third place in the trials. They were the only three to survive. As quickly as he had dealt with his enemy, Prince Damon left the warden's hall. The brother and sister looked at each other silently, trying to make sure it wasn't a dream. There was no need to force them to keep what happened here a secret. The next morning, rested after the stressful ordeal, Kyle was already on his way to the appointment. The White Star Palace required a special dress code, so he even had to change his clothes. The prince was slightly thrown off balance by Fred's tearful farewells. At the same time as all this, Priscilla, who had been so eager to break off the engagement, seemed to change her mind. The girl even gave Kyle a gift in honor of successfully passing the tests. But the princess was not the most cunning person in Damon Agnes's palace. Now the guy looked at Evelyn, who was sitting next to him, but he didn't know what to expect from her. His sister refused to let him go alone. The princess warned that she had long felt changes in the White Star Palace. It seemed that dark forces were competing among themselves for power. Members of the Agnes clan were pitted against each other, and Evelyn worried about Damon's fate. Even though the boy had changed and become stronger, she still wanted to help him. But Kyle's goal was to seize power throughout the empire. He was not interested in petty squabbles. When they reached their destination, Evelyn announced that she would leave him alone. Looking at the car's trail, the guy finally became convinced that this girl was not his enemy. On the threshold of the palace, he met his new servant, Clayton. Kyle noticed a very strong resemblance between this palace and his own, in the real world. The longer he was in this world, the less the prince believed in such coincidences. With these thoughts in mind, together with his servant, he reached Emperor Darren's chambers. The ruler of this long-suffering empire was gravely ill but still alive. Darren raised his heavy eyelids and looked at one of his descendants. He hadn't had time to say a single word yet, but the emperor was already sure that it was a different person. While Kyle was waiting for a very interesting conversation, Megan approached one of the palace gates. She was amazed that her new master had never lied in all this time. Based on such considerations, the witch was expected to face even more potential victims in the future. At the very entrance to Megan, the emperor's guards blocked the road, demanding permission to enter. The witch, of course, did not have it, but she insisted that her master was expecting this visit. When the guards asked for her master's name, Megan simply began describing the prince's appearance. She claimed that she didn't know his name, but everyone present was 100% familiar with him. Eventually, the guards got tired of this show and asked the girl to leave. Megan, as if she had been waiting for just this, quickly activated her blood magic. Meanwhile, in the emperor's chambers, Darren continued to claim that Damon had changed. He saw with absolute clarity another entity inside his son. Nothing here changed so quickly, especially considering that the emperor was behind almost all the attempts to assassinate the prince. No less than Darren, Kyle wondered who had made him bedridden. Such a question turned the emperor's entire worldview upside down, because he considered the boy to be involved in this. He explained how the demon kingdom emerged many years ago. Because of this, a war began between them and humans, which resulted in the emergence of many heroes. Eventually, years passed and the war became hidden. Not everyone understood that demons were now among them. Evil had penetrated the very heart of the empire, and no one could be trusted anymore. That's when Darren was poisoned. He couldn't even trust his own family. The emperor suspected each of his descendants, which is why he distanced them from him. Kyle was not going to hide his plans. He honestly admitted that his goal was to absorb the entire empire. This only caused a smile from the interlocutor. He was ready to agree to such a future. The demons in Darren's power did not suit him at all. He advised the prince to find the Shadow. The secret organization that the emperor was preparing for such events still existed and could be useful. This was valuable information that Kyle couldn't get from the pages of a novel. He listened intently. Unexpectedly, the prince found an assistant in the face of the old emperor. After meeting Darren, David had another reward for his ordeal. It was a visit to the Starry Dream Treasury, to which only Agnes's heirs had access. Incredible riches and the Empire's most valuable artifacts were gathered there, but they were not left unattended. There was a steward named Ethan in Starry Dream. The boy immediately rushed to give Prince Damon a tour. Like everyone who passed the test, Kyle could take one item from here at his disposal. The artifact had to choose its own owner, otherwise it would face a terrible death. From the novel, the prince knew that there were cases when none of the artifacts chose descendants at all. But it was worth the try. The guy was used to risking everything for the sake of a goal. The first thing that caught Kyle's eye was a sword that had a mythical power class, an unsurpassed artifact. But unexpectedly, his attention shifted to an object that the prince did not expect to see in this room. It was his own sword called Alaxia. Although it was broken, it still remained the Empire's most valuable artifact. Because it belonged to the first emperor, the weapon instantly recognized its owner, even in another world. Another car was hurrying to the Imperial Palace. The third prince's mage, Jeremy, was analyzing a recent unpleasant conversation with His Highness. Alex was unhappy with the test results. He was also concerned about the disappearance of all the assassins who were involved in the operation against Prince Damon. Only one thing was obvious. In the tavern, only traces of blood magic remained after them. Suddenly, Jeremy's attention was drawn to a crowd of guards running towards one of the palace gates. The driver replied that all the commotion was because of some unknown girl. She tried to get inside using blood magic. This unknown person turned out to be an extremely powerful magician, which came as a complete surprise to the guards. Jeremy was interested in this information. He decided to go to that gate too and find out more details. While everyone was preoccupied with the unexpected invasion, Kyle recalled the history of the creation of Alaxia. The sword was forged from a meteorite that fell to Earth, and only the prince's strength could increase its power. Kyle had only one question left. How did such a weapon break? Part 2 is coming. Looking back at Ethan, the prince said that he wanted to take this particular artifact from the vault. The steward looked with amazement and horror after the strangest representative of the imperial family. The fight at the gates of the imperial palace was gaining momentum. The guards were in despair. Despite their overwhelming desire to resist the uninvited guests, they were unable to do so. Megan easily scattered the boys one by one in different directions. The witch remembered Kyle's order that she should wait with the killings, but it was difficult. I had to fight not only with the enemy, but also with myself. Suddenly, Megan was pushed back by a rock that had grown out of the ground in a matter of seconds. Having flown to a safe distance, the witch saw that she had turned into a stone giant. This artificial monster even managed to step on Megan with its giant foot. The witch understood perfectly well that a powerful magician was behind this creature, and she was not mistaken. Jeremy ordered the guards to step back and aimed his creature at the one who had managed to resurrect. Megan was delighted. She had finally come across an opponent with whom she could not limit herself. She didn't care at all about the questions the magician asked the third prince. She didn't know any of the names of the organizations Jeremy was mentioning. His questioning was futile. The witch's impudent tone of speech only angered the court magician even more. He believed that he could easily deal with the opponent. Megan began to like this fight more and more. She was ready to forget her promises. It all ended as suddenly as it began. Kyle walked through the gate. He authoritatively ordered the witch to stop immediately. Shocked, Jeremy looked at the prince and could not recognize him as the young man he had seen before. Damon looked like a true emperor. Now all the results of the assassination attempts became logical. Megan cheerfully rushed towards Kyle, loudly calling him master. Everything was planned so that no one would have any doubt that Prince Damon was behind the recent events. Kyle looked back at the guards present and announced that the witch would come inside with him. This initially caused indignation, but under the boy's commanding gaze, everyone bowed their heads. To emphasize his status, the prince shifted the focus to the guards, who diligently carried out his orders. Even Jeremy had to bow his head before His Highness. In Kyle's opinion, everything was going as well as possible considering his plans. On the way home in the car, Megan told her boyfriend that she had done everything as they had agreed earlier. In general, the witch managed to do more. She had no more tasks left, even additional ones. The third prince should now have no doubts about Prince Damon's capabilities. Jeremy will definitely tell his master everything he saw and heard. Now all that was left to do was wait for a response from the opponents. An unpleasant surprise was that Priscilla was still in the palace. This girl had no inhibitions. But she was also shocked because the prince did not return alone but in the company of some woman. Megan was not one to keep quiet, so she immediately declared that Prince Damon was her master. Kyle called Fred and ordered, despite any objections, to finally send the princess home. This time, Priscilla could not avoid the consequences of her actions. Although during the time she was with Damon, she started to really like the guy. The very dark side of his personality worried the girl and forced her to think about him again. Meanwhile, the prince decided to discuss current problems with his inner circle. He announced that he wanted to find the shadow organization that Emperor Darren had told him about. For the prince's personal bodyguard, the problem was finding the location of this secret organization. But Kyle already had approximate information about their location using the chronicles of the novel. Despite this, the boy wanted to wait for some action from the emperor himself. A few days passed and all the heirs to the throne received a message about an urgent meeting in the palace. Evelyn looked at those present with suspicion. She understood that no family ties were an obstacle for them. The fifth princess, Diana, as always, began to make attacks on the third prince. This was her favorite hobby during all the general meetings. She didn't respect Prince Damon, but she felt that Alex's behavior was also unacceptable. The boy's name alone drove the third prince crazy, and it seemed to the girl like a very fun pastime. Damon's passing of the tests made even the fourth prince doubt. Eugene and Diana agreed that this wretch might not be what they thought. But of course, despite all the arguments, my own ego outweighed everything. The prince's brothers and sisters believed they could easily crush him to powder if he crossed the line. Evelyn could not stand the audacity of her relatives and came to Damon's defense. The matter almost came to a head, but she was interrupted by the appearance of Kyle, with Megan following behind like an elusive shadow. The prince carefully examined all the members of Damon's family, but it didn't last long because Alex couldn't keep his mouth shut. Eugene seemed to stand up for Damon, but the prince saw that this was a deceptive impression. Diana, meanwhile, was very meticulously studying the behavior of the newcomer. Despite the drastic changes, Prince Damon did not pose a threat to her in her opinion. Although Kyle was late for the reception, he noticed that Emperor Darren was also not yet in the hall. The guy thought that such a delay was connected with his promise of help. Megan, meanwhile, was slowly going crazy, the power around her intoxicating the witch. She longed to unleash her desire to kill and get rid of her master's enemies. But Kyle knew that such goals were beyond her own capabilities, especially if they attacked simultaneously. The silence, which had been dragging on for a while, was suddenly interrupted by Eugene with a proposal to arrange a duel. He was very interested in testing Damon's abilities and comparing them to the rumors. Diana immediately supported this proposal. It was decided that the prince would fight with His Highness's men. Alex, mockingly, suggested using his servant first. To the surprise of Evelyn, who was very worried about this turn of events, her brother immediately agreed to the terms. But Kyle suggested a real fight instead of just sparring. This did not please Eugene. He did not even expect that his proposal would be approved. Evelyn and Megan tried to dissuade the boy from committing suicide, one for her own benefit, the other for the greater good. Meanwhile, Alex was almost celebrating his victory, the prince always happy to humiliate his brother. Eugene announced the start of the fight, and everyone present focused on the opponents standing in the center of the hall. Evelyn didn't even have time to blink an eye when the fight was over. The head of the third prince's servant lay at Alex's own feet, as if a mockery from Damon. He was unpleasantly impressed by his brother's agility, who killed the boy with his own hands. Kyle turned to the third prince with a smile, demanding a real duel. The fight would have taken place in a few seconds, but the appearance of the emperor prevented it. Everyone present in the hall respectfully bowed their heads before His Majesty. Darren looked at each of his descendants and announced that he would get straight to the point. After a short pause, he named his heir. It turned out to be Damon Agnes. Such an important announcement changed Kyle's plans for the better. The guy didn't expect it. But he understood perfectly well that those present would not agree with the emperor's will. And so it turned out. The first to be outraged, of course, was the third prince, followed by Eugene. Diana even reminded Darren of Damon's place in the hierarchy of the imperial family. And only Evelyn asked about the reasons for this decision. The emperor was laconic. In his opinion, a more worthy ruler could not be imagined. This answer instantly threw Alex off balance. He was ready to kill Damon on the spot. Diana was more cunning. She understood that arguments would lead to nothing. The princess decided to offer an option that, at first glance, did not oppose the emperor in any way. But in reality, if everything goes well, it will rid her of a competitor. Diana reminded the public of the country's opinion of Prince Damon. It was logical that the people were outraged by the news of the appointment of such a governor. That's why she suggested that Damon prove his competence. The ordeal of the 7 great afflictions, in her opinion, was worthy of the imperial throne. Kyle really didn't expect anything else. For some reason, the boy was especially pleased by the sudden joy on Alex and Eugene's faces. The prince announced that he agreed to the terms. But after this ordeal, it will be the turn of his relatives. After the meeting at the Imperial Palace, Kyle spent the entire Sunday training. A broken sword was a bad ally, especially at this stage of self-improvement of strength. It would be good to find the other half somewhere, because using force to manifest it can currently lead to critical consequences. Despite the difficulties, Alaxia provided buffs for some of Kyle's skills. The prince understood that the main emphasis now needed to be placed on his own upgrade. Any technique at the second stage of development put the body in a bad state. Kyle decided to try to cause a lunar eclipse because he wouldn't have enough energy for a solar one. Surprisingly, the guy managed to do it without any special stress. Kyle, in this body, gradually learned to enjoy the little things, although it was very difficult at first. While the boy was honing his skills, Princess Diana also wasted no time. She understood that the guy would gradually become an obstacle if she didn't deal with this problem now. But more urgent matters were the search for Tina, whom the girl had only recently learned about. But her people didn't find the center. They just stumbled upon the tail end of the organization. Even such news could not but please the princess. She could also pull her tail. She was already mentally calculating the next steps, considering herself the smartest. After training, Kyle also decided to deal with the shadow issue and visited the palace's memorial hall. Among the busts and portraits, he found one that impressed him the most. The painting depicted the first emperor, whose name was Kyle Agnes, and moreover, having the same name as the boy, the Lord, he was also dug out from the outside. It's not like it came as a big surprise to the prince after the sword from his reality appeared. He slowly entered this world as if it had always belonged to him. The prince's thoughts were interrupted by a female voice. The girl named herself Beatrice Alonis. The museum curator didn't expect Damon to be so interested in her. Beatrice was proud of her work, because it was here that one could learn more about the history of the empire. Taking advantage of the moment, the boy asked about the organization of the shadows. When the girl began to explain the information as if it had nothing to do with her, Kyle cut her off. He knew perfectly well that Beatrice Alonis was the leader of the shadow organization, the so-called Eyes of the Empire. After his remarks, the museum curator's expression changed and she ordered him to follow her. No longer hiding her identity, she remarked that she had expected to see the prince here. Beatrice explained that their organization acts only in the interests of the empire and has free will, so they were busy observing Damon and his metamorphoses. Despite being appointed successor, the prince had to prove to them that he posed no threat. Many swords aimed at Kyle to test the purity of his soul. This was a rather interesting move from a representative of a secret imperial organization. Dodging the first attack, the prince saw behind him a multitude of knights. But when they came down from their pedestals, he realized that they were clay golems. Kyle deftly dodged any attacks from them. He coped with the challenge quite quickly, which was quite unexpected for the members of the organization. Beatrice couldn't believe what she was seeing with her own eyes. Before her was an incredibly fast and powerful fighter who was not afraid of challenges. Having dealt with all the opponents in the hall, the guy finally turned his attention to the curtain. A magical barrier separated him from the Shadow's guardians. But the prince decided to really show them what he was capable of. With one attack, Kyle broke the protective barrier. The guy's strength was like nothing else. Entering the other half of the hall, he immediately approached one of the members of the organization. Without explaining anything to those around him, with one movement, Kyle delivered a devastating blow. He remembered from the novel that there were many demons among the members of the Shadows, and this case was no exception. The monster immediately manifested itself. To enhance his abilities, Kyle grabbed Alaxia. The demon hadn't even had time to move, and the prince had already managed to eradicate him from this world. Looking back at the members of the Shadow, he saw that they had fallen to their knees before him, acknowledging their lord. For them, the prince became not just the emperor's viceroy, but the viceroy of the Eternal. The organization was founded by the very first emperor, Kyle Agnes. It turned out that for these people, the boy was undoubtedly the reincarnation of the soul of their lord. It was the appearance of Alaxia in his hands that became the decisive argument. This sword obeyed only Kyle Agnes, who in fact the boy really was. Realizing that this was to his advantage, the prince said he would give them a list. This list will contain the names of the possessed who were in the ranks of the organization. Instead, Kyle received information about Diana's involvement in the Shadows case. The princess found one of their branches and tried to bring them to light. But due to the lack of people, they needed time to cover their tracks. Prince Damon kindly agreed to help in this regard, without going into details. And that night, that same day, Megan met her next victims. The Death Witch grew more and more fond of her generous master. In the morning, Megan came to report to Kyle about the successfully completed assignment. In fact, she approached any matter very carefully and took into account the smallest details. The prince really liked this approach to the matter. Right now, the little things made more sense than the whole thing. Princess Diana paid attention to exactly these things, and one nuance was supposed to lead her straight to Alex. In this way, Kyle wanted to turn the relatives against each other and get rid of competition and backstabbing. Beatrice volunteered to check all the new servants in the prince's palace for spies. But this was not a priority for His Highness. Sometime after lunch, Princess Diana was finally informed that her entire unit had been destroyed. At first, she thought it was the work of members of the Shadow Organization. But as it turned out, the squad of the best fighters didn't even reach the desired location. Everything looked like a trap, which was what infuriated Diana the most. At the same time, traces of blood magic pointed to Prince Damon's ward. It was this witch who recently raised eyebrows in the Emperor's palace. But some evidence also pointed to the magician of the third Prince Alex. Jeremy loved using summoning magic. The princess believed Alex's version of human involvement within seconds, as planned. A few days later, Damon and Megan set off to carry out the Emperor's test. Local residents were brought to the palace as extras, and they made disparaging comments about the prince's abilities. The magician Jeremy, of course, was present among them, to later comfort his master's ego. Of course, hearing bad things about himself was unpleasant, but Kyle knew that it could be quickly fixed. Evelyn decided not to say goodbye to her brother in person this time. She watched from afar. The princess did not give up the idea of protecting the boy from a distance. It made her feel calmer. When Damon left, Jeremy came to the third prince for an audience. The magician has recently been leaning towards the fact that the object has found help for itself in black magic. Such changes could not have happened on their own. The eerie energy around Damon was especially striking. Jeremy was sure that the demons had a hand in this matter. After listening to his subordinate's report, Alex was in no hurry to rely on it 100%. This was a serious accusation that still needed to be proven. The fine line between diminishing the authority of the imperial family and eliminating a competitor was troubling. But Jeremy had already sent thugs after Damon to deal with the prince outside the capital without attracting attention. These two had no idea that before leaving the capital, the prince had decided to visit one place. The Moon Eye Guild, represented by Eileen, solemnly welcomed Kyle this time. They did a really good job while he was gone. The girl thought that Prince Damon had come here to find out information about the Ghost Legion. This is the problem that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. But he knew well where to look for them. Kyle's participation made changes to the plot of the novel. This time, the prince was interested in information about the most powerful people after the Emperor, and he didn't yet know what the outcome of his knowledge would be for those objects. Finally, Kyle asked to send a spy who had been following him before. It turns out the girl's name was Angela. Eileen took the opportunity to find out about the events in the Black Forest, especially when I caught sight of the woman standing behind His Highness's shoulder. Kyle wasn't going to answer, even though he saw that his interlocutor was right. From his expressive expression, the girl realized that she would pay a high price for this knowledge. The village, to which Prince Damon and his companion were just now making their way, lived a life of its own. None of the residents suspected that trouble awaited them. Andrew, as always, tried to fight off the boy who wanted to learn fencing from him. Even for money, he no longer wanted to be involved in any manifestations of violence. No one in this village knew his real name and former regalia. He had buried it in the past. The boy, in turn, was trying to protect his mother, which is why he was so persistent. This place was so remote that the letter of the law did not even come near here, so we had to rely only on our own strength. The boy was pulled out of his thoughts about his own future by the appearance of a strange man and woman. They were not local. Andrew, meanwhile, sighed with relief. This boy reminded him of his first love. He never thought their paths would ever cross again. Until now, the boy was her son. Lost in memories, he looked around and saw a stranger looking at him. The hair color, which Kyle did not hide, gave him away as a member of the imperial family. The prince introduced himself as Damon Agnes, and he wanted to get straight to the point. His Highness planned to meet with Andrew to get him to start working for him. He reported that this village was in great danger, and under such conditions, he was ready to help save people from trouble. But Andrew remained steadfast in his oath. He resolutely refused the offer. Kyle didn't try to persuade his husband, much to Megan's surprise. He just left. He did this because he believed that the warrior would eventually come to him on his own. Danger awaited the prince and the witch again around the corner. The third prince's squad of assassins hurried to carry out the order. While Megan dealt with the pawns, Kyle looked for their leader. A moment later, he was already near the girl and took her life. Two attackers who happened to be nearby attacked the prince to protect her. But he activated his power and a second later killed the first of them. Those members of the squad who were still alive decided that the confrontation was unequal and they needed to flee. But their plan was not destined to come true. The prince was not going to let them go so easily. When the fight was over, Angela joined Kyle and Megan. She reported the location of a group of demons who were waiting for the right time to attack. The boy, who had been watching what was happening all this time, rushed home to warn the locals. Meanwhile, Kyle agreed with the members of his group on a plan of further action. The demons were watching the village from a nearby hill. They had come for a specific person. Andrew, formerly known as the Ghost King, settled in this wilderness and was a prime target for evil. The monsters sensed the success of their operation, for now they had reinforcements. The chief of the Intermediates held in his hands the coordinates for summoning the Ghostly Legion. Against an entire army of evil spirits, one person, even someone like Andrew, could not stand. However, the monsters knew about Prince Damon's mission, but they also did not consider him a worthy opponent for themselves. Although he was under surveillance after agents of hell began to disappear from the Imperial Palace, it was hard to imagine Damon single-handedly destroying their colleagues. But the appearance of the prince on the hill radically changed the perception of him. More than anything, Kyle was curious about where the monster had information about the latest events in the heart of the Empire. Meanwhile, lawlessness reigned in the village and peaceful residents were being tortured and killed. No matter how quickly the boy tried to warn his friends, it wasn't enough. Unable to stand by and watch such a horrific invasion, he rushed to the defense. But his attempt failed almost immediately. He was easy prey because he had never learned to fight. The mercenary who captured him threatened to disfigure the boy's face. Rescue came from an unexpected place. Andrew punched the bandit in the face and knocked him to the ground. He still remembered well the words of his comrades who had died in the last battle. They wanted the captain to live a long and happy life and leave the service. But now Andrew clearly understood that he could not stand aside and turn a blind eye to lawlessness. The demons on the hill did not even realize that the Ghost King had begun to fight back against their minions. They were confused by the appearance of Prince Agnes and the power he turned out to have. In addition to the inconsistency between reality and rumors, it turned out that Damon knew more about them than he should have. Kyle, in turn, understood that these monsters were stronger than him, and he could not cope alone against all of them. When the three rushed at him at the same time, the prince decided he had no choice but to activate Alaxia. The advantage of this sword was in enhancing his abilities, the best helper in this situation. And indeed, the first attack was easily repelled with a few swings. When confusion arose in the ranks of the opponents, Kyle decided to take advantage of it. He approached one of the demonesses and struck her with his sword. The wound proved fatal, but this caused the activation of two other of her henchmen. They simultaneously rushed at the boy, who had almost no strength left to hold the blade's energy. The resistance was fierce. The demons realized that they could not attack alone and acted in tandem. While one distracted the prince with his skills, another one was sneaking up on him from behind. But all their attempts were in vain precisely because they acted quickly. Kyle's barrier was still working. Time was running out, so the guy decided to counterattack. He caught up with one of the demons who seemed to be the leader of the group and neutralized him. Another monster released a stream of dark energy towards the prince. It was so massive that the guy had to gather all his strength to repel the attack. With a quick counterattack, he took the life of his opponent. The leader of the demon group was amazed by the skill of the disgraced prince. This unknown power caused fear. In his memory, only the Eternal Emperor had such unique, impressive abilities. This guess prompted the monster to escape and report it to management. But Kyle had other plans for him. Realizing that he was in real trouble, the Horned One called upon the Ghostly Legion to help him. He didn't understand that the prince expected this from him. Now he didn't need the demon. Meanwhile, in the village, a frightened boy could not believe that his protector was the same Andrew. The attackers were also impressed by the stranger's abilities. One of them recognized the stranger as the same hero who had once put an end to the fight against demons. It was an unpleasant surprise because no one warned them about the confrontation with the Ghost King. But it was too late to run away, so there was no other option but to fight to the end. Andrew defended himself only with his hands, and his fist was stronger than any magical weapon. The murderers felt this well. The Ghost King remembered Prince Damon's words about attacking the village. Agnes knew what would happen, but what Andrew saw didn't look like simple robbers. A huge barrier separated their village from the rest of the world, which meant only one thing. They were isolated because the Phantom Legion would soon begin its invasion. Andrew knew he didn't have enough strength to stop such a horde on his own, but he had no choice. Despite the persuasion of local residents, he decided to stand on the defensive until the last moment. In the last seconds before the attack, he was stopped by Megan, who appeared out of nowhere. She asked to leave the prey to her. The witch craved new victims. A few seconds later, she unleashed all the monsters she was capable of creating into the world. The beastly army was ready to confront the invasion. Thus began the war for the village, one witch facing an entire army. But Kyle was not going to leave his ward alone. He easily broke through the magical barrier. The prince landed far from the fighting and carefully assessed the situation. He soon found the head of the legion among the crowd. This was the leader he needed. Realizing that her master needed to move forward, the witch decided to clear the way for him. She activated blood magic and simply incinerated any opponents who were too close. Kyle mounted the horse Megan had created and galloped towards the cursed king of the ghostly legion. What he needed most in this ordeal was the weapon Kronos had. And to do this, it was necessary to confront these magical creatures personally. The prince raced with all possible speed, and the enemy, seeing him, did the same. A few seconds later, their swords touched each other. The cursed king and Kyle flew past each other without causing any harm. But the prince did not want to stop there. He immediately turned back, despite the fierce resistance. Everyone he met on his path dissolved in Alaxia's energy. Kyle generated more and more energy in order to destroy as many enemies as possible with one blow. And finally, I saw my desired goal again. A powerful light shone all around as the cursed king and prince crossed swords again. The force of the impact shattered Kronos' weapon into pieces in the hands of the leader of the ghostly legion. But Kyle wasn't going to stop or let him catch his breath. He concentrated the maximum amount of available power into his blade. But having gotten as close as possible to the enemy, it suddenly changed trajectory and flew into the sky. This confused the evil ghost a little. But not for long, because the prince unexpectedly attacked him from the other side. A few seconds later, he repeated his maneuver, trying to strike again. But the cursed king foresaw this development and stopped Alaxia with his own hand. He pushed Kyle away and counterattacked. The guy barely had time to orient himself and dodge the blow in time. Suddenly, the leader of the ghostly legion said that he had been expecting Prince Damon's arrival. He was supposed to lift the curse, but for some reason he was too weak to do so. Kyle himself understood that such an opponent was too strong for him. The prince had only one way to win, and there was no time to waste. The guy took action. The members of the squad that Evelyn sent to follow her brother had just reached the village. They were dissatisfied with their task, because it could not bring them additional victories or any adventures. But everything changed when the warriors saw a protective barrier in front of them. The prince, meanwhile, unleashed all his power and skill with the help of his sword. It was as if Alaxia had become an extension of his hand. With incredible speed, Kyle struck his opponent. As a result of such an attack, the cursed king's hand, which held the weapon of Kronos, fell to the ground. The lunar eclipse the prince caused was enough to deal with evil of this level. Only this powerful technique of Kyle's was available to him at this stage of his ability development. But the cursed king was not going to stop. He picked up the sword with his other hand. The prince blocked a possible attack in his direction with lightning speed. From now on, the opponent could no longer consider him weaker than himself, because he received a worthy beating. Evelyn's squad understood that the prince they were supposed to be following was trapped within this barrier. In the end, they had little choice, so the warriors began to fight their way inside. The magic was so powerful that it took several hits before the barrier cracked. After a lot of effort, they finally managed to get inside. The surprise of the squad members knew no bounds when they saw that a real war was going on there. Even more surprise and concern was caused by the spectacle of the prince's duel with the cursed king. Kyle was moving too fast for his opponent, who barely had time to parry his blows. In the end, the prince wounded the ghost. No matter how angry he was in response, he was unable to successfully counterattack. In the end, Kyle even managed to hit his opponent in the head. He understood well that the time of the lunar eclipse was limited, and therefore it was necessary to act even faster. This behavior of the person made the cursed king ponder her nature. Ultimately, he recognized that Kyle might be the one with the power to free them from the curse. This meant that the prince would only have to endure one final test. He will be recognized if he survives the blow. The blue flame that erupted from Kronos' weapon illuminated the earth to the horizon, breaking through the confining barrier. At the same second, Kyle attacked his opponent. The cursed king seems to have waited forever for a warrior who would put him out of his misery. Everyone present witnessed an incredible spectacle. Alaxia absorbed all the powerful energy of Kronos' weapon in a matter of seconds. Moreover, Kyle seems to even be able to control this energy to his own advantage. The cursed king knelt before the prince. He was sincerely grateful to him for his courage, and from now on wanted only rest. The Phantom Legion was destroyed, so it was necessary to go after the reward. A guard was waiting for Kyle at the other end of the portal. He was surprised that the prince was not a hero destined to be rewarded for these exploits. This meant only one thing. The fate of the world had been rewritten. Somehow, Kyle interfered with the flow of time and arrived much earlier than he was meant to. It was as if a creature of the rank of God had interfered with the chronicle. Kyle himself aroused suspicion because the guard did not see his fate. The hero was not from this world. But according to the rules of this place, The prince had to receive his reward anyway. He gave the boy a bracelet that symbolized the 5 questions of Kronos. Each of the 5 stones had the power of a natural disaster, making the artifact extremely powerful. The 5th stone was supposed to appear when the boy activated the coordinates of the ghostly legion he received. This strange dialogue in the Temple of Time only confused Kyle. He did not understand his nature. While Prince Damon received his reward, in the village, Evelyn's squad did not understand what exactly they had witnessed. The power of the disgraced emperor's viceroy was, without exaggeration, impressive. Megan, having finished with her enemies, turned her attention to strangers. She wouldn't mind killing someone else, but they replied that they had come here to protect the prince, not to fight him. Andrew also decided to join the conversation and cause confusion with his appearance. He explained that the prince and Megan together dealt with the invasion of enemies. While the knights demanded details from one of their idols, the witch worried about the fate of her master. But Kyle unexpectedly returned. The prince felt squeezed out like a lemon and urgently needed rest. So everyone present had to postpone all their questions until better times. A few days later, Prince Damon, along with Evelyn's knights, was leaving the village. The residents respectfully lined up to see off their savior, led by Andrew. He solemnly announced that from now on he wished to join His Highness. But Kyle didn't need the Ghost King around just yet. He wanted to save this warrior for a full-scale battle with the dark forces. Andrew was so grateful to the prince that he agreed with his decision without hesitation. The next day, the Moon Eye Guild received news from the spy Angela. The disappearance of the Phantom Legion surprised Eileen seriously. No one knew for sure what exactly happened there, but Prince Damon emerged victorious again. What was even better was that no one except the guild and the participants in the events knew about what had happened. Damon Agnes was currently on his way to the capital. That's why Eileen needed to hurry up and get the information he asked her for. In addition to her current tasks, the girl was worried about the appearance of some unknown hero. Rumors spread in the Empire with incredible speed, even outpacing the guild's agents. In the evening, the prince finally reached his estate and immediately went to train. Kyle was trying to break through his ceiling and reach the 3rd level of self-improvement. But all attempts have been in vain so far. Prince Damon's body was not designed for such powerful force. Suddenly, Priscilla interrupted the training. This time, the girl didn't come to spy. The princess realized that she wanted to be useful to Damon and help him in some way. But Kyle reacted quite sharply negatively to her proposal. He believed that the girl's abilities were not yet sufficient to entrust her with anything serious. He wanted Priscilla to start actively improving herself. This girl, like the Empire as a whole, needed to make more efforts and change her destiny. After listening to His Highness's instructions, the princess left the hall. Beatrice and Angela came to visit Kyle in her place. The shadow was intended to warn Damon of the intentions of Prince Alex and his henchmen. They were planning something against the governor at the coronation ceremony. But this didn't scare Kyle at all. He expected Alex to waste no time and take action. Beatrice completed all the assignments in full and was not particularly confident in a positive outcome, unlike Megan, who longed to join her master. But this time, Kyle thought, the witch should have stayed home. Before this night was over, she had to do something else to achieve his goal. Several days passed in preparation for the coronation ceremony, and finally the solemn day arrived. All the nobility and members of the imperial family gathered in the throne room. Jeremy signaled to his master that everything was ready for their plan. Taking advantage of Damon's late arrival, those present began to discuss incredible gossip about him. Evelyn's help was not in Kyle's favor. The presence of the detachment in the village was considered an additional force, but all conspiracy theories were silenced when the arrival of the regent was announced. Prince Damon paid no particular attention to anyone. He walked briskly to his seat, but his incredible energy made those present hold their breath, especially those who were seeing the prince for the first time. Kyle didn't feel the need to sway any of the people in this room to his side. He was only interested in the plan and the coronation ceremony itself. Diana, who tried to make small talk with him, was shocked by this attitude. Finally, the start was announced and Prince Damon was invited to the podium. The bishop began to read the ritual speech, but he was suddenly interrupted by the voice of one of those present. It was none other than Jeremy. The 3rd prince's magician began to talk about his suspicions about the legitimacy of this ceremony. He believed that Prince Damon's sudden changes were due to dark magic, because it was impossible to achieve such a striking transformation so quickly. Prince Alex approached Jeremy in surprise, pretending to be hearing about it for the first time. The sorcerer decided to add weight to his words. He shouted that he was sure that Damon had made a deal with the forces of evil. Making a fuss in the throne room, Jeremy began to insist that this information needed to be verified. And that is why the coronation ceremony had to be postponed. A few seconds later, members of the church order joined the crowd. The sorcerer summoned them to test his hypothesis. He wanted to perform a ritual to expose the demon in front of everyone so that the prince would not be able to escape the consequences. Jeremy noted that he knew what would happen to him if he were falsely accused, but detaining the governor, he was confident in his rightness. The members of the church order began to recite the manifestation spell. Kyle offered no resistance at all. He remained absolutely calm. Jeremy was sure that the boy would not be able to bypass this spell. If the demon was truly inside the prince, the light that shone around him should have gone out. But when the ritual was over, no changes had occurred. Prince Alex at first didn't even realize that he had fallen into a trap he had organized. Jeremy, in turn, was preparing to imprison the owner's pitiful competitor. But the light did not fade. On the contrary, it became brighter and brighter. Prince Damon emerged from it unharmed and completely unchanged. The surprised customers didn't know how to react to what had happened. Everyone trusted the court sorcerer 100%. This is exactly what Kyle expected from his enemies. He held the opinion that one should not prevent people from digging their own graves. A few seconds later, the group of conspirators was arrested. Now no one could make Jeremy escape punishment. It was at this moment that Diana understood her brother's strange behavior. He turned out to be more cunning than many. This man was no longer a weak, disgraced young man fighting for his miserable life. The third prince's magician was right about one thing. Such changes did not happen by themselves. When the conspiracy was exposed, the coronation ceremony continued. A few minutes later, Damon Agnes was solemnly proclaimed Emperor Darren's heir. The third prince barely restrained himself from tearing the vile competitor to pieces on the spot. This sight made Diana smile with delight. The girl hated it most of all when Alex was happy. As silently as they had appeared, the official regent of the throne quickly left the coronation hall. A hungry witch was waiting for him at home, who had to do something important for him. Kyle gave Megan the coordinates of the Bloody Tower's location. Surprised, she didn't understand at all why she needed this information. But the prince had a plan according to which Megan was to conquer this magical fortress for herself. Sitting in prison, shackled, Jeremy berated himself for his short-sightedness. Damon turned out to be more cunning. He managed to fool everyone despite the evidence. Now the sorcerer faced the death penalty for his act, which was tantamount to treason. Jeremy hoped for the intervention of the third prince, and just as he thought about it, Alex walked up to the bars. But the prince did not look like a man who could stand up for his faithful servant. Quite the opposite. He made it clear that from now on, Jeremy could only rely on his own strength. Shocked by such betrayal, the sorcerer did not know what to say. His master, whom the magician had served faithfully and truthfully all these years, turned out to be a disgusting scoundrel. To compensate for his unspeakable rage, Prince Alex descended into the casemates of his own estate. His Highness so whipped the prisoners and his own men that they were unable to get up. From that moment on, the prince swore to himself to personally deal with Damon's fate. He walked, contemplating his next actions, past the prisoners who begged Alex to die. Meanwhile, far from the capital, two demons discussed the sudden disappearance of their colleagues. A very small circle of people knew about the plans for the original Legion, and Prince Damon's appearance there made me think that he had some secret leverage in this fight. It seemed that all the information they were accumulating about him was only misleading everyone. They were also concerned about the fate of their agent in the university's magical tower, where the prince intended to visit. It was decided to notify him so that the demon would behave more carefully and not expose himself. The next day, Austin the Proud met Prince Damon at the university. He was a teacher of magic, which he was not too lazy to kindly inform. It is natural that Priscilla studied at this university. At this very time, the girl was walking anxiously through the corridors, pondering the prince's words. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to a crowd of students who were watching someone intently. When the girl went to the window and saw who was the object of the excitement, she was very surprised. Prince Damon himself stood in the courtyard of the educational institution. Kyle immediately announced his intention to inspect the magic tower. He didn't just visit this location today. The guy wanted to change something in history. Reaching the lecture hall door, he asked if he could attend the magician's lecture that was being held there. Austin the Proud was a little confused at first, but Kyle was very insistent on his desire and did not want to hear any refusals. Opening the door, he immediately looked around the amphitheater with the students. Among the young magicians, he immediately saw the person he needed. The boy's name was Alan, and he had no idea of his glorious future. One day, he will become the first powerful legendary hero to be called the Whisperer. It is this man, the most powerful magician of the Empire, who will become one of the best friends of the future hero. But now he was only at the beginning of his journey. In the novel, he met with resistance members too late to tip the scales in favor of humanity. He had little time left to reveal himself in this team, and this led to his loss in the war. In Kyle's opinion, this was the reason for the fall of the Empire, which he wanted to fix today. Since the prince himself was here, there were two ways to do this. He decided to do both at once, continue to absorb the empire and help its hero. Sometime later, the professor, concluding his lecture, asked if the students had anything to say. One young man replied that he wanted to ask something, but he only wanted to hear the answer from Prince Damon, who was present at the lecture. He inclined to the majority opinion that members of the imperial family were more knowledgeable about everything. That's why the guy was curious about Damon's opinion about the formula the professor wrote on the board. The current level of magic did not allow for a solution to this problem, so any suggestions were welcome. In reality, the red-haired cunning man was motivated by Priscilla. He was outraged by the prince's refusal to marry her. The professor tried to tactfully refuse the student, but was interrupted by Damon. He kindly agreed to put his thoughts out there for everyone to see. After a few minutes, the students even forgot how to breathe. The formula was supposed to find a connection between space-time and magic and was very interesting to Alan. That's why Kyle decided to recreate it from memory from the novel. As he expected, the boy kept watching him. It was this great magician who discovered it in the chronicles. This direction was his passion. And now, by revealing her secret, the prince was turning history around for the benefit of humanity in the future. But the spectacular solution to such a complex task interested not only Alan. The professor was fascinated and wanted to immediately work on this interesting theory. The only person who, on the contrary, fell into despair from new knowledge was Priscilla. The girl finally lost faith in her own abilities in the face of Prince Damon's abilities. Not wanting to participate in any further dialogue, Kyle walked out of the audience. After leaving the lecture, the prince went up to the master's office. Clifford Oslima soon joined the boy, apologizing for being late. Whatever he was called in the chronicles, this man was one of the most powerful people in the world. He assured the prince that he was delayed for family reasons, but everyone knew that he had renounced his family and was only interested in university. Noticing this, Kyle decided to immediately tell the reason for his visit. But Clifford interrupted him. He had previously met Prince Damon, and so I immediately realized that his essence had changed. But Kyle wasn't going to reveal the secret of his soul to him. He skillfully avoided the answer. This forced the master to immediately apologize for his impudence and get to the point. Kyle needed a strange doctor, an improved magic circle, and help from Clifford himself. Because Damon's body was too weak, the strange doctor's abilities became a necessity. But this master healer kept in touch with the world through several people, one of whom was the master. Clifford did not contradict the first two wishes of the prince, but refused the last one. He could not break his oath not to attend anything except the university, but Kyle had a strong argument on this point. The Magister's help directly concerned the magic tower. Also, one of the matters the prince wanted to resolve could help strengthen the institution's magic. An hour after class ended, Alan was called to him by Austin Gordovidi. Although the student was going up to the challenge, his mind was completely occupied with Prince Damon's formula. Alan had many questions for His Highness. Only when the boy closed the classroom door behind him did he see a mountain of student bodies on the floor. Professor Austin's entire office was permeated with demonic energy, but as soon as Alan realized that this could be a trap and he had to run away, Proud opened the door. When the young wizard saw other teachers behind the professor, he realized that Austin was involved. Of course, the situation Alan was in looked very bad. He looked like a murderer, and the demonic energy on his hands looked like he was possessed by evil. The guy understood that nothing good could come of this situation, but he couldn't think of what to do. The teachers demanded voluntary surrender, but Alan only wanted to escape. The guy correctly assessed the situation. Austin Gordovit was behind everything. The professor was incredibly pleased with himself. 15 minutes ago, he invited several students from Alan's stream to his classroom. He dealt with them pretty quickly. The guys didn't even have time to understand anything, let alone defend themselves. The demon enjoyed the spectacle of a real meat grinder and the screams of young men. The trap for the future legendary sorcerer worked as well as possible. He followed the leadership's plan. But Austin's joy was premature as Prince Damon entered the room. The organization had warned Gordovi about this disgraced subject, but he thought he was being cautious. The demon tried to prevent the principal from reaching the audience, but the reaction was unexpected. The prince abruptly pulled out Alaxia and cut off Professor Austin the Proud's head in front of everyone. No one could understand what had happened, but it was irrational to speak out against the imperial family. Kyle ran his sword over the dead man's back, explaining nothing. He knew that he had little time before the true demonic entity appeared. The magic circle that Clifford had strengthened a few minutes ago was supposed to contain the enemy's power. The prince had barely finished his work when the mighty monster broke free from its shell. The astonished professors had no idea that such a creature was among them. The monster threatened Prince Damon with reprisals for his exposure. He rushed forward, wanting to tear him to shreds. But Kyle managed to activate the lunar eclipse, the only powerful technique currently available to him. The two opponents met in a fierce duel. They were not inferior to each other, and it was an amazing sight. Attack after attack rained down on the prince, but he managed to block them quite successfully. The demon was angry, most of all because he had been caught in his own arrogance. His fist and Alaxia's blade met, the force of evil so powerful that the sword began to crumble. The wizards of the magic tower, just in case, hid behind a protective barrier. They understood that there was nothing they could do to help Prince Damon right now. The strength and courage of the viceroy made the magicians hold their breath. Although the monster was an extremely powerful opponent, Kyle's goal was to stop it. He just wanted to prove to Clifford that he could trust him. Grabbing the demon by the shoulders, the prince threw him against the wall with all his might. The prince continued to restrain the monster with all his strength, and now he did not think about his condition at all. The master entered the room unexpectedly and quietly, but upon seeing the furious confrontation, he became furious. The strength of the demon's energy disappeared in direct proportion to Clifford's approach to the prince. In anger, the great magician could wipe out an entire city with his power, not like some evil creature. And now this pathetic monster was endangering the lives of the students at his university. No matter how the enemy spy tried to hit the master, his attempts were in vain. He held back the flames. Clifford gradually approached the true incarnation of Austin the Proud. Finally, having come close, he touched the monster's limb with his finger. This caused incredible pain to the demon, who urgently decided to flee. But Kyle was on guard and calculated its trajectory. With a lightning strike, the prince struck the dark spirit with the help of Alaxia. Thus, another spy of the Demon King died ingloriously. The professors and Alan looked at Prince Damon as if he were some kind of messiah. Kyle himself was pleased that his actions had accelerated the future meeting of the magician with the hero. When it became clear that no one present was injured, Clifford calmed down a little. Remembering the prince's request, the master insisted on keeping these events a secret. Most of all, the sorcerer was interested in what he should do, given the presence of such opponents. But Kyle remained consistent. He wanted the same three things as he had in the beginning. After meeting with the master while leaving the university, he met Alan again. The boy demanded answers to his questions, but the prince was not going to reveal the secrets of the future. He believed that time would put everything in its place. Having a friend from the heroes team could come in handy in the future. But the boy wasn't worth the effort just yet. Meeting the prince turned Alan's worldview upside down. Despite the false impression of spontaneity, Damon's actions were completely deliberate. And in order to be worthy of talking to such a person, Alan decided to improve himself. A clash with a spy in a magical tower exhausted the last of Avatar Kyle's strength. More than ever, the prince needed the help of a strange doctor. But it was thanks to recent events that the boy was able to approach the third stage of developing his strength. After the final restoration of Damon Agnes's body, Kyle sought to finally conquer this milestone. Beatrice and Fred were already waiting for the prince at the estate. They preferred that His Highness rest, but in any case, they prepared everything necessary. Kyle's plans were ambitious and did not allow for respite. Meanwhile, Diana was in her office thinking about her brother and the unexpected appearance of Alaxia in his arms. She knew the history of the sword very well and was not surprised by the lack of reaction from those around her. A limited number of people had access to the vault and understood the essence of this weapon. She didn't want Prince Damon to be made into a hero of all time. For these reasons, the princess decided to observe him more closely. She was sure he wouldn't be able to come to the meeting on national issues, but who knows? Participation in the meeting required the support of council members, and there were no people loyal to the prince. But, judging by her brother's temper, the princess understood that this state of affairs could change very quickly. The girl is used to preparing for all possible options. A car with a respectable passenger was moving along the night roads of the capital. The local aristocrat, Ashley Hawass, was full of anticipation of quick profit. Although he maintained neutrality, money changed that before every meeting on national issues. Today he was wondering whose side he was ready to lean on. Ashley's greedy thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of a stranger on the road. The aristocrat was thrown out of the car so quickly that he didn't even have time to orient himself. All he saw before him was a black cloud of energy. Looking back at his expensive car, the aristocrat saw that almost nothing was left of it. At this moment, the man was seriously afraid for his life. It was not surprising because the stranger, who had caused Ashley to suffer, was decisively approaching him. Although the aristocrat himself was not a hero, he had a squad of bodyguards in his arsenal. He summoned them without thinking for a long time and hoping that it would help. But all attempts were in vain. One by one, the men fell to the ground dead. The stranger, without any effort, destroyed the entire bodyguard of the honorable aristocrat. Ashley Hawas's legs gave out in terror. He realized he couldn't run. He could only wait for death. But everything changed when he saw the stranger's face. It was Prince Damon Agnes, who immediately reminded the rich man of the crimes he had committed. The longer the list of crimes became, the more Ashley trembled with fear. But today, Kyle wasn't going to kill him. He needed the aristocrat. Beatrice was at the same time busy interrogating another representative of the privileged classes of the empire. The man, even though he had a bag on his head, still behaved very defiantly. But it didn't scare the girl at all. It rather made her smile. Beatrice did not believe that the prisoner would be found sooner than she could get what she wanted from him. Moreover, she had something to offer him. When the prisoner heard these words, his anger turned to interest. Beatrice slowly removed the bag from his head. Prince Alex knew full well that Damon would try to gain a seat at the meeting. But this was not part of his plans. In the prince's opinion, he would try to sway the world to the side of neutrals. This could not be allowed, so he ordered his men to get ahead of their competitor. The longer this confrontation continued, the more hatred accumulated in Alex's soul. Having accomplished all of his goals for today, Kyle decided to return to his self-improvement. This was his last chance to successfully change the fate of the empire. He released his energy and began to generate a lunar eclipse. Gradually, a powerful force filled everything around him, and the boy completely immersed himself in his practice. After making great efforts, he finally reached the third stage of self-cultivation. Beatrice and Fred watched the starlight over the prince's estate, not realizing that he was the cause of it. That same evening, the master of the Crooked Tower pondered the organization's precarious future. Eric de Coles believed they needed someone powerful to survive. And if Megan, the witch of the celestial slaughter, appeared before him right now, he would be incredibly happy. Eric's thoughts were interrupted by a servant who reported a fight at the gate. The master immediately hurried there, but stopped when he saw the bloody spectacle involving his men. Megan, upon seeing the chief local sorcerer, playfully greeted him. A few minutes later, they were sitting in the office, answering each other's questions. When the witch introduced herself, the reaction of everyone present irritated her a little. To be honest, Megan had hoped for more resistance and skill from the local sorcerers. She completed her master's task, but decided to do something more: create a strong army. Upon learning of the murder of the spy in the Magic Tower, the demon conspirators met again. They tried to analyze what happened and the involvement of the university master in the case. Of particular concern was the possible conspiracy between Clifford and Prince Damon. Ultimately, they coordinated the assassination of the imperial governor, especially considering the existence of such black hatred towards him from the third prince. The demons wanted to get rid of most of the influential pieces from the chessboard before the hero appeared. The day of the meeting on national issues arrived, and participants began to gather in the conference room. So far, only the council members could observe each other and gossip. There was no representative of the imperial family yet. Ultimately, all conversations, whatever they were, came down to Prince Damon. But the gossip fell silent when Princess Diana entered the conference room with her bodyguards. She always arrived early to stay up to date with everything. The second princess, Evelyn, followed her into the room. Eugene surprised the aristocrats by appearing without security. The third prince entered the conference room without attracting much attention, which was uncharacteristic of him. He focused all his attention on Damon and was glad he hadn't shown up. The third prince considered himself an extremely far-sighted man. Although the hypothetical appearance of the enemy was stressful, Alex was confident that he had outplayed him. The day before, the prince had spent the lion's share of time trying to win over everyone he could to his side. Evelyn stood up from her chair and announced the start of the meeting. But the announcement of the arrival of the sixth prince, Damon, made everyone freeze. Kyle was not used to such warm meetings, so without greeting anyone, he quickly walked to his seat. A long silence fell in the conference room. None of the members of the imperial family could understand how the boy entered this hall. The first to break the silence was, of course, the third prince. He attacked one of the managers, demanding an explanation. Alex was sure that Damon had somehow tricked the security guards. But the administrator announced that the viceroy had received the support of 11 members of the council. This news seemed to physically hit the third prince on the head. He looked sharply back at the council members he had recruited the day before. Kyle carefully watched his competitors' twitches and even enjoyed them a little. He noted that he had secured the support of council members who were not at all neutral, as his brother had believed. And to sow even more discord in the ranks of the competitor, he noted that the problem was precisely with Alex's people. Finally, the third prince completely lost control of himself. At that very moment, Kyle announced the start of the meeting with a smile. Evelyn, as the oldest member of the council, announced the summons. But the aristocrats present did not listen to her at all. They were busy examining the viceroy. Only after seeing Prince Damon could one understand why the sorcerer Jeremy had been imprisoned. A legitimate viceroy could create problems for the established dark forces in the empire. In turn, Kyle also closely observed everyone present. He understood that he had to eliminate half of them and teach the rest to live by the changed rules. The main problem for the prince was still Alex. Their relationship was rapidly deteriorating. While Kyle was lost in thought, Evelyn had already summed up the meeting and declared it over. A vote has already been taken on the last question, but suddenly Prince Damon decided to make a statement. He wanted to discuss organizing the parade and holding it earlier this year. The catch was that members of the imperial family had to be present there with their own troops. And everyone, except Prince Damon, had their own people, but he was alone. Evelyn didn't know how to react, although she understood that she often couldn't understand her brother's train of thought. Damon insisted on not spending more than a Sunday preparing. This proposal did not find any contradictions on Eugene's part, but Diana decided to disagree. The princess could not blindly follow the prince's path, not understanding where it would lead. The third prince also supported the initiative. He was still focused only on killing his brother, and it didn't matter to him how and under what circumstances it should happen. Evelyn only now understood her confidant's concern about Damon. The man considered him an absolute monster, considering that the prince had no military training. Now she saw that her brother thought strategically in categories that were inaccessible to most. The princess was interested in the reason for Damon's sudden proposal. She knew very well that the guy had a very limited circle of people loyal to him, but he was still in such a hurry. She even offered him her people, just in case, but he, of course, refused. Instead, the prince himself decided to share some information with his sister. For several hours, Princess Diana wandered through the rows of her library, pondering what had happened. She couldn't understand anything, no matter how hard she tried, and Prince Damon's visit to her completely confused the girl. The princess preferred to get straight to the point. She was eager to learn more to analyze her competitor. Kyle did not shy away from the subject of conversation. He declared that he wanted to fight Alex. This desire of her brother only caused even more confusion in the girl. Without dwelling on what he had said, he added that he would like to borrow Diana's strength in order to win. Now the princess completely stopped holding back her emotions. She laughed out loud. She still considered the boy weaker than her and didn't want to risk her reputation to help him. Ultimately, the princess was interested in her own benefit. Sitting across from him as he spoke, she displayed her impressive energy. But Diana had no idea that in front of her was not the same former Damon. Kyle released his dark aura and it made the girl gasp. The princess did not recognize this dark force at all, but her very presence made Diana tremble with terror. When Diana's fear became apparent, Kyle explained that her direct involvement was not necessary at all. All he needed was her army. The prince knew very well that the girl hated the third prince more than anyone else. And also, from the novel, he knew that she herself had planned the attack on Alex, but it had failed. The reason was what was happening in the dungeons of his palace. Listening to the governor's arguments, Diana weighed her options. She understood that she alone could not cope with the strength that the third prince had. And this weirdo Damon seemed to have a plan. When the boy told her in detail what he was going to do, the princess was impressed. Ultimately, this persuaded her to agree to participate. The princess ordered all her available troops to be gathered in the palace. It shouldn't look suspicious because of the parade. She was willing to take any action to achieve what she wanted. Alex, meanwhile, was receiving a report from his scientist in the dungeon of the imperial palace. He was interested in the results of experiments he had commissioned to be conducted on humans. The scientist announced that the progress was quite significant, but they would not have time to finish the experiments on Sunday. This, of course, was sad, but the third prince was confident that he could handle his brother without it. He knew that the boy planned to oust him from the palace. So, for these reasons, I decided to act proactively. Believing that Damon would have a small number of men, he wanted to crush him with this advantage. Scrolling through various scenarios, Alex decided that he was ready to provoke a fight himself. Everyone warned him to be careful, but the prince's ego prevented him from heeding the advice. The hatred he felt for his brother generated more than just a desire to kill. Alex wanted Damon to beg him to die himself. At home, Beatrice warned Kyle that the third prince had already begun to act. Megan was also at the right location and awaiting new orders. Therefore, the boy decided to start the operation, despite the persuasion of the head of the Shadow Order. Remembering the history of the Chronicles, Kyle understood that attacking the third prince now was the right decision. He was the easiest target now. Eventually, when human experiments yield results, Alex will become too powerful. That is why Diana's attempt to eliminate him in the novel became fatal for her. Together with the detachment of the fifth princess, Kyle set out to storm Alex's estate. He felt a tickling sensation inside him, a sense of danger that was so familiar in his past life. The sentry sorcerers guarded the entrance to the palace, unaware of what was coming their way. As if from under the ground, a small army appeared before them, led by the sixth prince. None of them had time to warn their master. One by one, Kyle eliminated both of them. As soon as his foot crossed the threshold, guards and sentries began to rush into the hall from all sides. And although they were fearless, it was clear in advance what the results of the battle would be. In a matter of seconds, the third prince's palace turned into a slaughterhouse. The army of the elements of the fifth princess was impossible to resist. They were the most experienced warriors. And today, Prince Alex's people felt their heavy hand. A not-so-large detachment of fighters raised a storm that destroyed everything it touched. When everything was over in the lobby, Diana's people wanted to leave with Kyle. But he preferred to advance up the mountain himself and sent the princess's men into the dungeon. The army of elements encountered many obstacles on its way and successfully dealt with them. Anyone who dared to resist them paid the price with their lives. When they finally reached the first room of the laboratory, what they saw shocked them. Those who had once called themselves humans looked like monsters, devoid of any trace of humanity. The third prince's sorcerers immediately tried to stop the uninvited guests. They decided to use the newly created creatures for this purpose. But such actions only angered the army of the fifth princess, who were determined to destroy everything they saw. A fierce battle began between the forces of good and evil. Kyle also progressed in his search, wandering the corridors of Alex's palace. And although he was alone, his appearance was feared as much as the entire army that came with him. But all attempts to stop him, no matter how powerful, failed. He overcame every obstacle with lightning speed, leaving behind the corpses of his opponents. Each time, Alex's defenders grew in number and they were not going to retreat, because they were more afraid of their master than of the stranger who came to them at night. In the end, the prince was so fed up with the petty skirmishes that he decided to take drastic action. Due to the upgrade of his strength, he was now able to release a strong stream of his energy faster. Like giant tentacles, the aura particles found their targets and struck them. In the end, a few seconds after activating this skill, no one was left alive except Kyle. The dungeon laboratory was cleared in 20 minutes. It seemed like the mission would soon be completed. Now the betrayal of the third prince was obvious. He had bound himself by a pact with the demons. The head of the elemental army squad approached the door, which was at the very end of the room. Opening them a few centimeters, he was met with a furious flow of dark energy. But the man didn't have time to react, because he was instantly killed by the creature hiding there. This was the same scientist Alex constantly consulted with. His cover was threatened by a surprise attack on the third prince's palace. Because of this, people were able to learn about the existence of demons in their ranks much sooner than planned. There was nothing that could be done about what had happened, so the scientist had to flee. He quickly ran out of the palace, constantly looking back to make sure he had not been noticed. But the escape was a failed attempt because Megan suddenly appeared on his way. The witch felt the powerful energy emanating from this stranger and decided to attack immediately. The scientist was taken by surprise and barely managed to dodge and avoid the blow. Megan licked her lips at the anticipation of delicious food. While the sixth prince attacked Alex's palace, Diana could not decide whether she should join the offensive. She was worried that Damon wouldn't be able to defeat the third prince on his own. Of course, the death of the most impudent weirdo was also a good option, but she was interested in dungeons. In the end, the princess decided to go to Alex to make sure of the death of her main enemy. Evelyn also came to the palace with her people because of the information her brother shared with her. She didn't fully understand Damon's plan, but it was obvious that an offensive was underway. The intervention of the fifth princess was also undisguised, as her troops were visible from afar. A lot of time had passed since the last fight, and it seemed that all obstacles on Alex's path had disappeared. But it was a deceptive feeling, and Kyle had good reason to remain vigilant. The sudden attack of the demoness was swiftly repelled by the prince. The first was immediately followed by a second, but it was not possible to break through His Highness's defenses. Another henchman joined the demoness, attacking from the side. The impact was so strong that Kyle lost his balance and hit the wall opposite. These two monsters were higher in rank than all the previous ones, and they were sure that they were stronger than him. Their appearance in Alex's palace was no accident. The scientist was calling for help. From what they saw now, he was demanding protection from a single snotty. But on the other hand, it was the perfect moment to finish off the prince. Damon has recently caused a lot of concern among the leadership of their organization. While the two held an impromptu meeting, the prince had time to recover somewhat from the insidious attack. He released energy outward, and approaching his opponents, gradually accumulated its amount. But he didn't do it silently. The boy provoked the monster with humiliating remarks towards them. Kyle was enraged that the demons had managed to bypass his vigilance and, after all, briefly disorient him. The prince did not allow his opponents to prepare a defense. With lightning speed, he rushed towards the monster in female form. This greatly angered her companion, who immediately regrouped. But Kyle was ready to attack this time. He activated the armor of the Eternal Emperor. They came with Alaxia, but were not available until he leveled up his power. Now the prince was protected from all types of physical attacks. His body was to remain unharmed. A giant demon and a man came together in a fierce fight. A few seconds later, Kyle had absorbed everything that was left of the giant. Now only the demoness remained. If the first one didn't have any chance, then she has even more. The prince flew up to her and grabbed her by the head, as if expelling her from her shell. He relentlessly dealt blow after blow to his opponent, depriving her of the opportunity to escape. In the end, the monster suffered the same fate as its henchman. Now Kyle truly felt that there was no barrier left between him and Alex. A few minutes later, he opened the door to the prince's office. He was expecting the arrival of his sworn enemy, although he himself planned to destroy Damon later. Meanwhile, in front of the palace, the scientist was still trying to avoid death from the witch's extraordinary power. Seemingly without any effort, she did things that few wizards in the world were capable of. Strangely, such a powerful person has until now avoided the watchful eye of the demon clan. The scientist understood that this opponent might prove to be too much for him. His priority remained escaping the palace and avoiding prying eyes. With dark magic, with just one blow, he unexpectedly got rid of his opponent. Although this surprised the scientist quite a bit, he immediately ran away. But Megan, recovering within a second, stopped him halfway. This worthless dark wizard didn't know who he had contacted, and she was going to prove it to him. A moment later, the man realized that his situation was completely dire. He had few options left for maneuver. He couldn't escape due to the intense pressure. With all his strength, the scientist tried to block the opponent's attacks. There was only one way left for the monster: to take on the true form of a demon, which he was. But doubts about revealing her identity allowed Megan to get dangerously close to him. While Megan dealt with the spy, Alex apologized to Damon in his own way. He admitted that he underestimated his brother's abilities from the very beginning. He perceived all of Damon's victories as simple luck, but everything changed with his appearance in this office. Now Alex recognized him as a competitor, and the competitor turned out to be so strong that the need to kill him right there outweighed everything else. At the very beginning of his formation, Alex was inferior to other descendants of the imperial family. The power of the Star Sea submitted even to its smaller brothers and sisters, but not to him. This made the prince passionately strive for self-improvement. After all, he invented to combine the powerful techniques of the imperial family and the magic elements of the Clifford clan. Fortunately, he and the most powerful wizard in the world were related, which made Alex Agnes's monster. But as time passed, the third prince's power level almost completely stopped increasing. It was in this moment of despair that a scientist came to him, promising to throw the throne at Alex's feet. Of course, he agreed to the conditions of the cunning demon, which was the stranger. The prince did not care about the price. Alex did not object to any of the horrific experiments on humans in the dungeons. It was the results of black demonic magic that gave the third prince a significant increase in power. And now this worthless Damon was trying to thwart all plans for greatness and power. Kyle donned his armor, preparing for the main battle of the night. The light of his energy instantly absorbed the third prince's aura and gradually filled the office. Alex had never seen such a strange power before. He considered the power of the Star Sea to be the most powerful on the planet, as did other members of the imperial family. Tired of talking, the prince was the first to attack the uninvited guest. With one movement, Kyle parried his opponent's blow. Having done this, His Highness immediately launched a frontal attack. This made Alex laugh because he considered such an act to be a real suicide. The containment spell formed a cocoon around Kyle. But the third prince's tactics were ineffective. The attacker's advance was not stopped. Eventually, the sixth prince reached his target and struck, forcing Alex to quickly dodge. When the first blow missed its target, Kyle immediately attacked again. Only the protective barrier that the third prince quickly formed between them saved him. The attacker did not give up. In the excitement of the fight, the prince did not take into account the structural strength of the building, and the floor of the office collapsed. Since Kyle was at the epicenter of the collapse, he fell along with the concrete debris into the palace hall. Seeing his opponent lying on the floor, Alex cheered up, thinking that the end was near. The third prince thought that Damon was so stupid and did not take into account his power before attacking. Delivering one of his next pompous speeches, he moved closer and closer to the boy. Kyle seemed to have lost his last strength, but that was a deceptive impression. The guy had an ace up his sleeve. He decided to use one of Kronos's questions and freeze time. He rose to his feet, activating the bracelet with a smile. Alex didn't really understand what his opponent had done, but the fact that he was still breathing was driving him crazy. The battle erupted with renewed vigor, but none of the third prince's blows reached their target. They were destroyed by the barrier around Kyle. While Alex was considering how to change tactics, the opponent took advantage of the delay. The sixth prince grabbed his enemy by the head and threw him to the other end of the room. The object of the attack did not even have time to properly defend itself from surprise. The pressure was too much, and in the end, it turned into a powerful explosion in the middle of the once beautiful hall of the palace. Kyle smelled blood and couldn't stop. Victory was too close. He accelerated the frequency of his attacks to make effective defense impossible. Alex understood that to save his life, he needed to increase the distance between them. With the last of his strength, the third prince generated a powerful shield that pushed the enemy back the required distance. But no matter how hard he tried to hold back the pressure, it slowly buckled under the force of his brother's thrust. In the end, the defense was finally destroyed. Kyle demanded a decent fight from Alex, not half-hearted defense. Once again, pinning his competitor against the wall, he noticed that he would die at his hands. This behavior, which had previously caused his brother's ridicule, was horrifying. Damon turned out to be a monster. The guy seemed to have turned into a real death machine. Kyle decided to use his strength to the maximum. This should be enough for the final victory. The race for survival began, with Alex simply running away from the angry knight in armor. He tried to protect his life with all his might, terrified by the realization of his mistake. The third prince felt the sword of death rapidly approaching his chest. This forced him to gather his will into a fist and generate all his power in one blow. The ceiling of the palace hall was illuminated by myriads of lightning bolts. After hovering there for a split second, they flew rapidly towards Kyle. But in an instant, all this powerful energy was absorbed by Alexia and transformed into black mist. Stunned by such an instant transformation, Alex realized he had no more options. He couldn't let Damon win and was willing to do anything to make it happen. In desperation, Alex summoned all the available dark energy stored deep within his body. Instantly transformed into a product of demonic power, the third principal went on the offensive. Kyle didn't stop him from committing suicide. He wanted to see the horror in his brother's eyes before his death. It was at this moment that Evelyn and her men entered the palace. Megan also immediately felt a powerful energy burst out and pulled away from her opponent. The scientist immediately took advantage of this and escaped through the portal. The witch was very upset by this ending of the duel. She hoped that she could absorb this powerful force and advance in her self-cultivation. Megan was very attracted to the powerful dark magic that was now oversaturated in the third prince's palace. In recent days, she had often remembered her promise to destroy her master, but now she was completely content to be with him. Megan decided to join Prince Damon inside the enemy's palace. Meanwhile, Alex had already managed to release dark magic towards Kyle, but he deftly dodged the attack and wounded the third principal with his sword. He didn't have time to orient himself in time and prepare some safe tactics for himself. Alexia tore him to pieces, causing incredible pain, but his opponent didn't even think about stopping. It was a battle to the death. Alex signed his own death warrant when he clearly demonstrated his collaboration with demons. Kyle saw perfectly well that they were no longer alone. Evelyn had legitimized the elimination of the traitor with her presence. From this moment on, his actions will not be considered a violation in the eyes of the law. In the eyes of other members of the imperial family, the sixth prince restored their honor and respect. But at the same time, he didn't want to just kill his opponent in a few seconds. Kyle wanted to torture him before he died, so that it would be perceived as a lesson for other traitors. Enjoying the action to the fullest, he drove Alexia into the third prince's chest. As Alex departed to another world, he only thought about who his opponent really was. He was sure that what was standing before him now was not his worthless brother Damon. He had neither such strength nor such character. But not only was he pondering this question, Kyle was also pondering his own nature. Even in his real world, he was significantly different from everyone else, as if he were an alien. The guy was sure that only by mastering his power would he be able to learn the truth about his essence. The third prince finally breathed his last. Prince Damon won this battle of honor. Kyle's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Diana. The girl could not believe her eyes. What was most impressive was that the once worthless brother was able to deal with the powerful Agnes monster. But it was inappropriate to clarify the relationship, because Alex's loyal guards were rushing to them. Within 3 days, a crowd of people gathered near the palace of the sixth prince, wanting to join his army. Priscilla was impressed, although she herself would have gladly joined the people who could be of use to Damon. But Kyle didn't want to see any of them. With Diana's help, they defeated Alex's most dangerous henchmen. He sent Fred to meet the outstanding individuals who organized the selection. The princess watched the prince, analyzing how he had changed over time. His aura was unlike any she had seen in her entire life. To be at least somehow useful, The girl even learned how to brew his favorite drink, coffee. But as it turned out, it didn't suit his taste at all, as is Megan's taste, which has become an integral part of the living room gatherings. The presence of this stranger greatly angered Priscilla, especially since the princess couldn't understand the strange relationship between Damon and her. In the end, the girl decided to directly ask about what was bothering her. But the witch responded in her usual manner, provoking Priscilla to indecent thoughts. Kyle calmed both girls down. He had serious plans that needed to be thought out in detail. After the last battle, the condition of his body deteriorated. If such consequences are ignored, he may soon die of his own strength. Also, one of the prince's goals was to restore Alaxia, and he needed to find the rest of the blade. Kyle's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Fred, who opened the door to the room. He announced that the venerable Sir Oscar Ascalon requested an audience with His Highness. To be honest, the prince suspected that he would appear on his doorstep. This man served the Agnes family and was the best swordsman in the empire. Evelyn was also deep in thought at home. The girl analyzed everything that had happened in recent days. Her brother turned out to be not at all the weak young man she had worried about. In terms of power, he eventually surpassed the monster that Alex was considered to be. Of course, the result of the betrayal was that the third prince's former henchmen abandoned him. The black magic Alex experimented with left him with the imprint of a pariah forever. It was obvious now that Damon had planned to do what he did from the beginning. He undoubtedly had information from somewhere about what exactly the third prince was doing in his palace. Evelyn herself was troubled by the fact that she witnessed the almost instantaneous absorption of Alex's powers by Damon. After all, the princess admitted deep down that she might soon come face to face with the prince. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of a servant. It turns out that guests have come to her house. The fourth prince, Eugene, decided to visit Evelyn.